What is up, guys? It is time for a little NBA deeper dive where we're going to talk about an important Game 7 today in the Eastern Conference. We'll basically discuss every single part of it that you'll need to know, including some prop bets and some general showdown strategy from a man who's very well qualified to talk about it. But first of all, I'm the one who's not qualified to talk about it. No, that was too self-evidencing up top. I'm Chris Spags, but I am joined by a man who's also been one of our key men behind the scenes here at Awesemo for our data and some other stuff behind here, and also one of the top DFS players in the world, the man who just took down 2 showdowns yesterday. He's Steve Buzzard. How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing really good. Thanks for that introduction. Super excited for the Showdown only days. So I've really enjoyed Showdown all season long, but playoff Showdown is the best because it's the only game in town, so the prizes are bigger and the rotations are a little bit more condensed. So you have to get a little bit tricky to come up with some good lineups. So yeah, super excited to talk about this, and hopefully we can get someone up there up top, and maybe we'll try to share it with only a few of us.
Yeah, I think Steve and I actually, we shared, you might not even know this, Steve, because you're taking down so many, but 2 weekends ago, I went out for dinner, had a lovely night with a girlfriend, and saw that I had tied with you, with Rinpack, with a lot of the illustrious names of DFS in that last Saturday showdown. And it's really just a glorifying feeling to be amidst you guys as peers there. And that's hopefully the thing all of you guys could strive to today on the slate. And actually, here's one thing you guys can do right now. If you have any showdown questions, anything you've ever wanted to know about showdowns, obviously anything specific to this one, we're probably going to talk about through the course of the show, but leave them in the chat on YouTube or on Premium Slack right now. Steve does a fantastic job talking about all the machinations of a showdown slate and DFS in general, usually on our Awesemo Plus Premium Slack channels, the Office Hours channel in particular. Steve is always in there. But if you have any questions for this show, you can get them live on air before we really dig into the slate itself. So drop them in the chat right now. Super chats, obviously, on YouTube going to be the best way to get seen, but leave them in there and I'll get them in a second. But let's hit the plugs. First of all, get yourself all of the Awesemo Plus data for today's slate, for every slate for the next week, by going to awesemo.com/join, using the promo code NBA Deeper Dive for 25% off your first week. Get all the data that we talk about on here, the player projections, the ownership projections, the boom bust tool for the multi-game slates, though I don't think we'll have much of that anymore. So, but either way, still lots of great tools to help you make money. And the showdowns in particular, I'm sure Steve will talk about a lot more about it in his process, but definitely a core part of what you're doing is looking at the ownership, figuring out what the field is going to be and trying to work around that. So go use that promo code NBA Deeper Dive at awesemo.com/join, and make sure you're also playing over at Prize Picks, who, if you're tired of honestly games like Showdown or the more complicated ownership projections management, just sorting your lineups, all of that, go over to Prize Picks. They've simplified daily fantasy for all you guys out there, where you could say goodbye to sharks, to optimizers, and to max entries. All you do is pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players available on the board to go over or under their projected scores. If you correctly predict a 5-player lineup, you can net up to 10x of your initial entry fee. So go check it out over there. They have the NBA, MLB, WNBA, NFL, and even esports, and all these different sports. You combine your props as well to get them together onto one lineup. So it's a different approach over here. It does simplify daily fantasy sports in a way a lot of you out there who've been frustrated, I'm sure, over the recent weeks or just in general want to try something new. So go check them out and use the promo code Awesemo for a $100 deposit match over at Prize Picks. And some ones you could take a look at today. It seems like maybe the over on Kevin Durant points, 35.5 might be a good one. Chris Middleton, 25.5 points. James Harden, if you're a person who likes to dive into the risk, he's at an 18.5 point line over on Prize Picks. So go check him out, and we'll talk more about some props coming up in a little bit. But Steve, talk to me a little bit about showdowns. And I guess if you were in an elevator with somebody and had to give them that pitch to tell them, hey, here's what you could do to win a showdown, or at least to make yourself competitive in one, if you're putting in 1 to 5 entries, let's say, what would you tell that person when they're very curious with you and maybe even handsy in an elevator?
So I think the most important thing that you want to consider in a showdown, especially in the NBA showdowns, is it's a really tough balancing act between going too chalky and too contrarian. In a lot of the showdowns, like for NFL, it's pretty easy to go pretty contrarian because it's only one game. Anything can happen. Someone can score a luck box touchdown and break the slate, but not nearly as easy for that to happen in NBA. So you have to be really careful on the balance between the two. You don't want a lineup that is going to chop with 200, 300 people. That's not going to be great for you long term. You want to, when you get the answer right, you want to get paid off for that answer. But if you go too contrarian and have too many, just kind of out of the box picks on your lineup, especially right now in the playoffs, some of those guys may not even play. They may play 5 minutes. That's not going to put you in a very good spot to be able to win. So I think NBA showdown is really tricky in that sense, but luckily, like you mentioned, our ownership projections over at Awesemo are the key for me. So pretty much I haven't seen anyone else in the industry with ownership projections for the showdowns, and definitely not anywhere. If anyone has them, I can't imagine that they're anywhere close to as accurate as what we have. So you have a huge advantage by using some of the ownership projections that we have, and you can kind of estimate how likely some of your lineups are to be duplicated just by kind of multiplying the ownership projections together and seeing what their number comes out to be, and then kind of dividing that number by, it'll basically tell you, like, for instance, if it was just a simple math of just 2 players and you were just trying to multiply and they both had 25% chance of being in the same lineup, you would, that'd be 25% and 25% is 1/8. take kind of the inverse of that, means 1 out of 8 lineups would have that combo of those 2 players. Just do that same thing for 6 different players, and you can kind of estimate how many of that lineup is going to be in the contest. And you don't want a number that's too high. Maybe you try to keep it in the 5 to 10 range. So yeah, I think that would be probably the biggest thing that I would take into consideration. And then also just don't be afraid to play the big names here today. You're not going to get a lot of minutes off the bench, guys. So you got to pick and choose your spots and live and die kind of with Giannis and Durant and some of these guys.
So one thing, Steve, that I wouldn't say preached, but at least, advocated for a little bit more when we were doing the late slate shows. We were focusing on some of the showdown slates a little bit more. It's something that for me, generally, if I'm just throwing in one lineup for the showdowns, or if I played the main slate and I'm just like, whatever, I don't want to really do a full slates prep, but I just want to get one more in there to try to balance out and maybe have one moonshot to get something in the mix. The one thing that I like to do right away is try to take out the highest owned captain for that lineup I'm building, just because I presume that guy could be useful in a utility spot. And then that's one way to get different. You can find a guy who maybe has comparable upside. And on a slate like this one, it might be a little different because it is a game 7 today. I'll give it away here. Giannis projected to be the highest owned captain on Draftkings. And then on Fanduel, it'll be Giannis is also the highest owned MVP. So keep that in mind. 2 different games, obviously, and we'll talk about that as we go. But there's that one as a precursor. But for this one, Steve, I guess the question I would have for you, is that a strategy you would consider? Again, if you're a person who's just trying to chop up, the 100K tournament on DK, are you willing just to get rid of that top owned captain right away and just focus on, at least eliminate a fifth of the field, sometimes a little bit more?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say that that's my favorite strategy. I think it's reasonable, but the one thing that you have to also keep in mind with the top owned captain is they're also often the top owned utility as well. And if you don't play him in captain, you're going to play him in utility, and then now Giannis, I think we have around 60% in the utility and 20% or whatever the number is in the captain, and now you got Giannis with 60% of the field instead of with 17% of the field or whatever his captain number is. So I don't know that I necessarily want to eliminate him from my captain spots. I would just because of the fact that you're with him on so many utility players instead. I do think today is a little bit different overall. The strategy on DraftKings in particular, if we're looking at the captains, is a lot flatter than what it typically has been most of the season, as well as most of the playoffs as well. Today, our ownership is very flat on the top guys at captain. The sites, both DraftKings and FanDuel, actually did a really good job, I think, of pricing this contest competitively, so that people are not on the same players. They've had 6 chances to figure out the pricing, so they should be able to get it right at this point. But yeah, I think they've done a really good job this one, and this is probably the most spread out that I'm seeing my captain ownerships as well as my utility ownerships. And Giannis is coming up as my highest owned captain just because he's just getting so many minutes right now. The whole Milwaukee team is getting a lot more minutes than what they were. So we had complained, I think everyone on Twitter basically has been calling out Milwaukee for the way they handled the minutes last postseason and the way that they started this series against Brooklyn as well. And you can see with Giannis, his minutes, the first 2 games in the series have gone from 33 minutes to the 41 the last 4 games. Similar trend for Drew, who's gone from 35 to 44, Middleton from 35 to 43. All the way across the board, there's very condensed minutes for Milwaukee. So I think going with Giannis, I think they're going to run him even more. So I think going with Giannis is a pretty good bet, but because of how flat they are, if you're doing multiple lineups, even up to 5, I'd probably spread it out and, maybe have one of all different in all of them. There's not someone that's that much of a favorite for me.
So we got one super chat I'm going to hit on in a second, but I have one question for you. And I think it's something that, just trying to keep everything earnest here with what we talk about with our data and all that. And as you mentioned, like we are the only one out there doing Showdown ownership projections, but these playoffs to me have been a little more unpredictable for the ownership, I think, than at least, for some slates, and that we've had a little more in the past where, there's a lot of times where we're certainly in the mix for them. But the thing that I've mentioned on some shows that I feel is that, the field's A, so sharp, but B, playing in a way that's, I wouldn't say suboptimal, but maybe less logical than the ownership normally expects the field to be playing. That, like last time out, we saw Durant at 30% captain, Giannis at 30% captain on DraftKings, or, around that mark. Is there any sort of accounting for that margin of error that can occur? Like, I think the ownership projections are a crucial benchmark. And for me, I've mentioned on the show, like when I've had some of my wins recently, it's because I sort through the ownership and I take out X amount of lineups, and then I'm willing to take whatever the next 150 or 260, whatever the case may be, for however many I'm playing on a given day. But is there any way that you account for that in your process where just, relative to human error, just, the unpredictability of the field, that sometimes it can be, a 5% difference, sometimes even a 10% difference. And that can be a meaningful change for people who are expecting one outcome.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the best ways to do that, I don't know if I follow 100% what you're saying on how you take them out, but I think an idea of in Showdown, if you delete even the first like 150 or so lineups that are projected and just say, I'm not going to use those because they're going to be duplicated too much, I think that's a pretty good approach. You could do the same for the top projected ownership lineups, and I think that is also a very good approach. I think if you're playing the top lineups, they're gonna look good and they're gonna feel good, and most likely everyone else is gonna think the same. So be willing to get a little bit different. It's a lot easier to get a little bit different in a one game contest when you're going against, just the players in that game versus all the guys that are going in a whole slate of a normal contest where you might have like 10 different games to choose from. In a Showdown, you need the optimal lineup to win. And in order to get the very most optimal, you have to be a little bit more unique. And like a main slot lineup, you might be able to miss the top lineup by 10, 20 points and still be able to win it. But you have to be pretty serious to get it in Showdown.
Okay. Yeah, I think that all checks out for me. And there are a lot of videos that Steve's done for office hours as well. If you are an Awesemo Plus member, we now have the page that archives all of those as well. So honestly, feel free to dig through them. I think it's a helpful watch, especially some of these slower periods here coming up. If there's a night, without an NBA game, I know Monday there aren't any, and you're not playing the MLB slate, though, check that out too. But it's going to be worthwhile to do your homework here and try to catch up on some of the stuff and the strategies that are out there. And so we'll talk more about Steve with Steve about all these strategies throughout the course of the show. But definitely something to try to dig into a little more, I think, when people have free time this summer. Super chat from Hugo saying, haven't taken anything down to significance yet, but I've learned a ton to put myself in a much better place in terms of process. Much appreciated, gentlemen. That's very kind of you to say, Hugo. Hugo, one of our regulars here. And of course, and I think he's a member of the channel too. So we appreciate that doubly here and just giving all the money to the channel that Hugo has. But we very much appreciate it, Hugo. So definitely really just try to hear as best you can what Steve is talking about, and definitely take it to heart because it is an important part of the process from a guy who's definitely doing well. Let's talk a little more about the teams themselves, Steve. And let's start with Milwaukee. And guys, hit that like button if you can. Looks like right now we got 440 people in here, only 61 likes. So help us. I feel like 100 seems like a good amount here. That wouldn't even make us a competent MLB hitter for hitting 250 in the league, but it's still a good enough one. We'd probably tout him on MLB shows. So hit that like button, get us to 100 likes. We'll all feel good about ourselves. But Steve, talk to me about some of these Milwaukee players. And you started with Giannis, and the one thing that jumps out to me with Giannis on DraftKings in particular, and we talk more about his Fanduel ownership at MVP as well. But Giannis, to me, being cheaper or being more expensive rather than Kevin Durant being the cheaper of the two on DraftKings, I'm gravitating more towards Durant. And I know that, Giannis looks like he'll be a little bit higher owned according to the projections that we have right now at Awesemo, but I feel more strongly about Durant, and I have no issue playing Giannis really as much as you can. But I think there's just a higher probability of Durant not only having the ceiling, but having the floor, given that we have seen Middleton have some better days recently. Drew Holiday still kind of I wouldn't say a sleeping giant, but somewhere in that category. I guess my question for you, if Giannis is the chalk captain, how are you approaching that? Are you with the field? Is there some sort of process you're approaching to figure out where you want your exposures to be? Just how does it look where a guy like Giannis looks like a good play, but maybe there are some viable alternatives, and also a lot of the field's going to be on Giannis as that viable play?
Yeah, so I think it's pretty tight between the two of them. I think I'm leaning slightly for Giannis as my preferred captain, and Durant slightly over him at the utility spot, but it's fairly close. The big thing with Durant compared to Giannis is we have not seen Giannis get up to, I think 43 minutes looks like it's been this highest that he's got up to. There is a chance that Durant might play even the whole game, all 48 minutes. And Giannis, I don't think has quite that upside to get to, but he might be able to overtake 43 minutes today. I think we have him projected at 45 actually. So we're definitely projecting him to, go most of the game. The one thing we also haven't seen Giannis do, like you said, Middleton's picked up a lot and had a lot of the high scoring games. The stats for Giannis have been pretty consistent for the season. A lot of the teams, whether it's been Luka or Durant or anyone else of the big names, their usages has gone up over the course of the playoffs. But for Giannis, it's been pretty stable with where he's been for the full year. So we haven't really seen him dominate the ball the way that some of these other stars have. So I think that is a little bit of a hesitation, but I think I am going to still, even with that hesitation, lean a little bit more towards Giannis.
Yeah, so Giannis certainly going to be a well-represented play, as we talked about, a top-owned option on DraftKings as a captain, and looks like he'll be the top-owned option as the MVP on Fanduel. And Steve, talk to me a little bit here. I know we sort of did our showdown strategy, but I guess we could talk briefly some single-game strategy for Fanduel, where it is a different equation because you're not paying a steeper price tag for these guys, and you are getting the multiplier price, but you're paying the same price tag across them no matter whether you're playing them at MVP or the utility spot. So how do you approach that where MVP for Giannis on Fanduel looks like he'll be about 42% projected ownership? You'll have Durant and Harden, I guess 20% less for both of them, it looks like, at the MVP. So do you head into Giannis there as the MVP as your preferred option? There it seems like you have more wiggle room to get above it if you want, but I guess, does the approach change for you at all between DraftKings and FanDuel?
Yeah, it is quite a bit different, which is really nice. A lot of times there's players that you can be over the field on DraftKings and under the field on FanDuel, and they kind of give you kind of a natural pivot point. And it has a lot to do with that fact that you don't have to pay the multiplier. So on FanDuel, you definitely want to go more often with the big name players at your 2x position and 1.5x as well. That said, FanDuel did a really good job, I think, today of pricing up both Giannis and Durant. 16,500 for Durant, 16,000 for Giannis. It makes it really tough to get both of them into your lineup. And if you want to add Harden, it's pretty much close to impossible to get all of those. So you have to choose carefully. I think most likely the lineup that wins is going to have one, I would say, of those two between Giannis and Durant, maybe like a 30% chance that it will have both of them. So not unlikely, but not the favorite by any means. And you have to pretty much put them in one of the multiplier spots. You could get away with keeping them at the 1.2 multiplier spot if you want, but don't play either of them at the utility spot, because if you're paying 16,000 and it's really hard to tell a story where that high of a cost is going to pay off for you, but it's not going to be needed in one of those multiplier spots. You can kind of get there with the 1.2x if, let's say, Harden had a good game and one of those other guys did as well, and it was just Harden was kind of like in between them, right? He had to be like the 1.5 multiplier, or Middleton as well, right? He could be a possibility. So I think you can go in those, but definitely don't play either of them into utility.
That's an interesting little tidbit there. And I guess the one question I have for you that you mentioned, and we are going to talk more, obviously, about each individual player. And I feel like Middleton, we can sort of segue over to, but he was the MVP last time on FanDuel, if I'm remembering correctly. And he was the guy who had the highest upside overall. And to me, that's the kind of play that I certainly love to put in for differentiation, where today he'll be 2.6% projected ownership at MVP. Is that something you'd be willing to chase though? Because it seems like you're going more towards Giannis and Durant, and it also feels like Harden maybe not as much of a consideration for you as the field, but we'll get there. But is Middleton in play for you at MVP, or do you feel like that was kind of an aberration spot? And especially with these guys likely to get more minutes. I know we have these guys projected for around 45 minutes today. Most of the star players, the starter players for both teams. Are you willing to get to a Middleton and MVP, or are you really trying to limit that player pool at the spot?
Yeah, so on MVP, it is tough to get to him. It looks like I do have him in one lineup, so there's a small chance that he gets there. But I think he's going to get over-owned based off of that last game like you're talking about. I saw people mentioning him in the chat. I saw him mention him in our Slack chat on Twitter. I do think that there's a chance that he picks up more ownership than what he's deserved for that 2x multiplier. And I think our ownership is already fairly high on him, compared to where he would be most games throughout the season with this teams. But I have a feeling it could potentially even get a little bit higher because of that last game. In the playoffs, everyone remembers that last game really heavily, and because it's the same two teams going against each other, and their rotation is likely very much the same. But you do have to remember still, even though that the minutes are the same, there are still outlier performances in terms of shooting percentage, in terms of usage, lucky bounces on rebounds, etc. So it is a lot more predictable right now, but it doesn't mean that he's like a guarantee to have a big game again. We saw Terrence Mann kind of show up everybody yesterday, right? So.
It still ended up as winning captain, which is kind of baffling. But yeah, that was definitely an aberration of a game, and certainly we can see some weirdness. And I guess that's a question I'll ask you, Steven. Obviously, we're going to talk more specifically game by game, but is there any Terrence Mann of the world out there for you? I feel like that's always the question that general players are going to have. And I think if people out there have played a lot of showdowns throughout the year, you'll know there really aren't a ton of Terrence Manns normally that you come in, the guy's been a low usage guy, and all of a sudden spikes 50 fantasy point upside. But is there anyone you would consider even to have that shot of, like I feel like it's more viable to say like a Kevin Huerter was just shy of 40 fantasy points the other night. We talked about that on the Live Before Lock show. But is there anybody that you think can be that value play that really spikes an upside meaningfully? And I guess there could be a few candidates, but I'm curious if one jumps out.
Yeah, I think that I don't think anyone will be Terrence Mann, but I do think that Pat Connaughton could be a really good option for folks. He is on DraftKings anyways. On Fanduel, I don't really like him, so that's actually one spot where you can go a little bit different between the sites as well. So, but on DraftKings, I think he looks like he's my second favorite player overall. Only Giannis is a higher percentage if I add up both my utility and captain. And I think that is a pretty good play. Even at captain, I think he is pretty good because he allows you, if you go with him at captain, then you have a lot better shot of getting a couple of guys like Giannis, Durant, Harden, Drew, Middleton, all those guys that you really want to play. If you do use him at captain, you can get there. And I think that's why the captain ownership is so spread out today, is because there are more guys that are viable in that range. Jeff Green is another example that can kind of get in that range as well. But I think Connaughton is interesting because he's still so low priced and his minutes have ticked up pretty considerably. So I mentioned a lot of the Milwaukee guys that the team has taken seriously earlier, right, with Drew and Giannis all having their minutes tick up. Connaughton's also had his minutes tick up from where he's been throughout the year, as well as games 1 and 2, where he's about 17 minutes per game. He's had those tick up to about 22 minutes the last 4 games. And let's see, I think he had, exactly 22 minutes last game as well. So 22, 32, and 22 the last 3 games. So that means they have a lot of confidence in him in the games that they are needing to win, and they've done well in those games. So I think that he continues to get those minutes. I mean, he's not the highest usage guy, but when you're getting those minutes and you helps you get a lot of salary in, that's a pretty good spot to be in.
So go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I'm with you on Connaughton. I feel like the minutes there seem pretty solid for him. He's definitely a guy that's opening up a lot for the lineups that I built. And I guess one other question I had for you that I kind of blanked on before we got into all this, but Awesemo often talks about how, and Alex, I'm talking about Alex Baker, not Awesemo as a company, but Alex mentions a lot of times that he'll try to normally aim 15 minutes or 15 points rather within the optimal projection to get the lineups that, he's willing to get to. On this slate, at least from what I was crunching, it feels like there isn't a lot of lineups within that range, especially if you are accounting for ownership and you're trying to lop off a certain percentage of that. So is that a mark that I guess it might not be that exact mark for you, Steve, but is there a mark you look for a Showdown where the lineups are greatly decreasing in quality the more that you dig deeper? And if you're running 1,000 lineups, you might find 500 or so. I think for me, it was closer to 750 of lineups that are just not going to be above that benchmark. So is that something you're willing to play faster and looser with on the slate, or is there just something else you're doing in terms of how you approach that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That range of 15 points is a really good one for most sports. For Showdown, I think it gets a little bit more where I think you could go a little bit further just because you do have that offsetting benefits of the further you go down, the less duplicated they are. So I think there's a little bit of an offset where you are able to get some upside by going a little bit further down. You're going to lose a lot more often, but when you win, they're going to pay off a little bit more. So I don't have a hard, fast rule with that. And I think today that is definitely the case that you can't get too many of them. I don't know why it is sometimes, right? Just certain combinations work together some way. And then it maybe the first handful of lineups are within 5 points and 10 points and it just drops off really quick. And that does seem to be the case today. I noticed that as well.
All right, so let's talk more about some of the specific plays on Milwaukee. And I feel like we've talked about Connaughton as a value play, but let's dig more into Chris Middleton because he's the play that, to me, I have lived and died by Chris Middleton a lot this playoff season so far. And in particular, recently it's been good. There was definitely a stretch earlier where it was not so good in the playoffs, but Middleton's been really solid. And he is one guy that I've been trying to get to for the most part, or not even trying to, but just naturally occurring a lot with my projections in the minutes that we are getting from the Awesemo projections. And this spot today, it's certainly a little bit tougher to get to in price tag wise. And it does feel like it could be a bit of a Sophie's choice situation for people on Draftkings and really probably Fanduel too, where you're choosing between getting one of Drew Holiday or Chris Middleton into a lineup. So how are you handling that today? It looks like the field's ownership actually going more towards Drew Holiday, which surprises me a bit given that Middleton has been the hotter player out of the two, but Drew Holiday has the assist upside as well and certainly can score better than he has throughout the course of the series. So how are you viewing these guys? And I guess do you view one as being a higher value than the other, or one you're at least getting to more than the other?
Yeah, for me, I think both of them are very similar. You make a good point on their ownership projections. They are pretty similar. And I've got to believe that Middleton will pull some extra attention just because of that last game. So you might want to just consider that a little bit on your own, whether you're looking at our ownership projections or just building lineups on your own that even if it seems like Middleton is coming at a value, I have a hard time believing that he is. So I have Middleton slightly ahead of Drew as well. And he's just been getting so many minutes. He's been playing so well. It feels like half of this year we complained about him just letting us down in prime situations, but now he's coming through in games that actually matter, and the whole narrative around him has changed significantly. So I'm willing to ride with him again, and I think that he's a good play. He's going to get as many minutes as he can handle, and I think I have no problem plugging him in.
Yeah, to me, I end up with exposures pretty comparable to both guys. So I got a little bit more Middleton at captain, but for me, I wouldn't say I've been over projecting Middleton because obviously he's been smashing projections recently, but he's a guy that to me, I have at 50 fantasy points compared to 47 for Drew Holiday. The Awesemo projections are much closer. It looks like 46.1 for Middleton compared to 44 for Drew Holiday. And it's worth pointing out too, our player rankings are free today. So you can check out all the player projections in grade form on the site for free. So if you want to take a look and get a read on how the slate looks according to Awesemo's data, you can get that for yourself as well. And it could be a helpful asset today to build some Showdown projections without having your own projections out there. Talk to me about Brook Lopez, because he's another guy here who a more reasonable price tag theoretically should have some more upside. And, we have seen Bobby Portis basically excommunicated from the lineup so far for whatever reason, just the defense not quite there from enough in the series, it would seem. And Brook Lopez, certainly a guy who can have upside in the right situation, can get hot from three, can also rebound a little better. And he does historically get a bit of a rebound boost to an 11% rate in court time with without Dante DiVincenzo. Is he somebody that you're getting to at any sort of volume? Because it does seem like he's one of those guys that maybe the ownership projections are going to be a little bit more aggressive on because he looks like a solid play, but I think people aren't necessarily clamoring to get to Brook Lopez. And sometimes those plays, even though they're not the most sexy, can be guys who make a difference.
Yeah, I think Brook Lopez is a good one. Especially on DraftKings. On Fanduel, I don't care for him quite as much. On DraftKings, I think I have him around half of my lineups, and I think that's a pretty fair rate. He's another one of those guys that you can get in the captain spot for sure, and he's going to help you get a lot of really nice players into your lineups. If you put him in the captain at 6,000 for his base price and whatever the math, 9,000 for captain. That's really good. That'll help you get a lot of really good players in there. He's also seen his minutes increase significantly throughout the playoff or this round in particular. 26 minutes up to 33. The last 4 games, we have him projected a little bit higher than that, even just because of this game 7. And I think everyone's going to push to their full extent. So I think that he's a good play for sure.
Do you think that he's the one most likely to lose minutes to Connaughton potentially? Because that was the case in the fourth quarter last time out, though. The Nets went a little smaller than usual, too, I think, with Shamet out there. But it did jump out that he didn't get the fourth quarter run. And I think there's volatility to Lopez, which normally, if you guys watch a lot of these shows, that I like to lean into that as much as possible. But I think that he was the one that comes to the most risk probably of getting that minutes haircuts. PJ Tucker, I don't think there's any way he's going to lose that run. Are you feeling that way about Lopez? Because to me, the 50% mark seems about right as well for ownership. So I'm just wondering if you're seeing it through that same lens for Lopez that probably has some upside, definitely has some tournament upside, but also I think there's potential here. He plays, 30 minutes or even a little bit less than that, and we see Connaughton's minutes come up a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I do think, he ended up with 30 minutes last game, so it's certainly in the range of outcomes. So pretty much all the other guys have had, they went from lower minutes in the first 2 games to increased all the way throughout. Lopez saw his minutes increase to 34 minutes and then kind of drop down to this 30 last game. So if he ends up in the 30-minute range, then yeah, he definitely is going to be a bad play. So it's a risk, and maybe his upside is capped a little bit at that ownership. So yeah, I might have to rethink him a little bit and push him down a little bit. That's a good point.
Yeah, and I think, there's volatility there. So if you're a person, who's trying to get crazy and you're just loading Brook Lopez into a bunch of lineups, I think that's just one little cause for concern that I observed that for me is just why I wasn't going to get a ton of Brook Lopez anyway, but definitely was a reason why I'm just going to be above the field, but not crazily above the field. Talk to me about PJ Tucker too, because I think the minutes are secure for him. We know the production is not the most secure on the year, 0.48 fantasy point per minute guy. Although today I do have a project for 0.49. So I think that should be a little bit better, but Tucker does seem like a play, Steve, that, the minutes are there. We know he can get hot from the corner threes. We also know he can miss every single one and just, luck it to a few rebounds and steals. And that's basically his day. How are you approaching him with his price tag? Really not at the spot anymore where he is a tier above Connaughton in terms of price tag. And, certainly I think these guys, you probably would consider them similar fantasy plays.
Well, if he's getting 0.49 today instead of 0.48, then you got to lock him in there, right? That's a guarantee.
It's a big boost. It's hard to argue.
No, so PJ Tucker seems to get a lot of hate in the DFS circles just because of that low. I'm not sure that he's the lowest in the league, but he's definitely probably pretty close to the lowest of guys that play meaningful minutes anyways. So there's a very rare chance that he's going to blow up the slate with a huge game because he might have some upside on minutes, but his minutes aren't that volatile. His points aren't that volatile. If he goes from 0.48 to 0.49, that's not taking you down a contest. The thing that's going to help you is that he's going to, if he can beat Connaughton, one, and then help you get some of these other guys into your lineup. So I think that's the main thing. And he's got to beat Jeff Green too. Jeff Green's about the same price. Jeff Green's a little bit more, I think. But yeah, if he can beat those guys and help you get those other guys in your lineup, that's really his path to success, I think.
And talk to me a little bit about Bryn Forbes, because I know we talked about him briefly before the show. And on the props tool that we have, the Bryn Forbes under 0.5 assists currently has a 78% win rate according to the Awesemo props tool, which is a big part of what we talk about in terms of the prop process. Just, trying to watch the minutes projections from Awesemo and figure out how it's going to result the trickle down effect on everybody. And you can always bet these yourselves on oddshopper.com or oddshopper.awesemo.com to shop for the best lines for all the props. But Steve, give me your thoughts on Bryn Forbes, because he's a guy that has seen some minutes upside. People may hold him in some degree of fondness from the first playoff series where he did have a hot run at times. And it does seem like he's a guy who was in the blowout build lineup last time out of the guys who came in rather once the game's out of hand for the Bucks and the Nets. And it seems like Forbes can be squeezed here in a meaningful way. Today we have him projected for 9.5 minutes, but even that could be a little bit aggressive based on his first half run. So just what are you doing with him on the slate?
Yeah, I think his props are a really good one to kind of fade. So all of them, essentially, I like the under. His points, rebounds, and assists. His minutes throughout the series have gone from 22 to he's on the opposite end of those guys that are getting more minutes. He's been squeezed down to 13, and then over the last 4, then he got all the way down to 11 last game. And like you mentioned, some of those came in the garbage time. So 4 of those minutes came there. So he was likely going to be around 7 minutes without that garbage time. I think it's very fair that he could get that or less. This game that could very well be a DNP. I don't think that's the likely answer, but it's not out of the range of probabilities. So if you can jump on his under 5.5 points, I think that's a pretty good bet. Also, the assists and rebounds are both well within the under 0.5 on both of those. You're going to be sweating out if he does get in, because you could luck box into an assist or rebound very easily. But they are paying pretty good odds. I don't have the assist one up here right now, but the rebound one is at plus 180, which is a pretty good rate that I'll be able to be pretty interested in. And I bet that one right before we got on here.
Yeah, definitely check out those odds and make sure to check out the props tool as well. Actually, I'll drop a link into the chat because I think it's one of those tools people might not even be aware of because it came about a little bit later in the season than some of our other tools that are out there. But this one's free. You could go click through, find some of the best bets for yourself. So take a look. Check it out in the YouTube chat right now. There's the link. One guy I just want to talk about real fast because I saw, I think it was Tom Spalding saying Portis interesting, though probably not. And Tom's been very nice in the chat today, so I'm going to make sure to give him some love here. Portis, to me, he was a guy I got in that first game that he had he was still getting projected for minutes, basically ended up out of the rotation. I would not play any of them today, Steve. I don't know if you feel any differently, but there's maybe a pathway for him to get a minute or two if things get desperate, I guess, but it's on the projections, and I don't want to take that leap of faith for anybody out there.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. He hasn't played any of the last 2 games, and I think did he get in any of the garbage minutes last time? I don't think he even
he didn't.
Running with the garbage guys. So yeah, I don't think that I would play him.
Yeah, it's tough when he's really in kind of no man's land where they don't respect his defense enough. They don't really need his scoring. And then also he's just not young enough to be getting those blowout groups. So Bobby Portis, maybe put him in your back pocket if they make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. But it seems like in this round, probably not the best bet. Let's start to talk about some of these Nets here. And guys, hit that like button if you can. We got Live Before Lock coming up next. And might be some changes on that one to the hosting. We'll see here because I got to reply to a Slack. But let's see. Let's talk about Kevin Durant more because I mentioned, Steve, that he's the guy that I like the most on the slate. The rates to me really jump out these last few games with James Harden clearly limited, not his full go, under a 20% usage rate in these 2 games since he's returned to this hamstring injury. And Durant, I guess the question is, are you buying in on what he's been doing this series? Are you willing to sort of, focus more on that rather than the longer term sample size? But I think that there are some things that I could point to where he still had a 28% assist rate all season long, where maybe the 38% assist rate he's had these last 2 games with Harden out there isn't quite going to hold, but the mark's been good. The rebounding of 15% assist rate these last 2 games, I don't know if that's going to be there, but he's normally around a 13% rate guy. So to me, I'm all in on Durant today. I just feel like he's the guy at captain and also at utility spot that I want to make sure is basically going to be in all my lineups. But how are you handling him on the slate? Because, there are some ways, obviously you're going to force your way to a lot of Giannis and Durant, but there are some lineup constructions where you're probably going to have to choose one that do look good. So I guess is Durant going to be a clear second to you behind Giannis?
Yeah, I think Durant is. I think he's going to keep up some of those rates that he's had so far in the playoffs, as well as specifically in this round without Harden and with Harden banged up. I don't feel like Harden is 100% still. He's certainly not playing like it Harden that we're used to seeing. And every game he comes back and plays that he's getting more and more healthy. So it is a possibility that he comes out and just, still takes over the way that we saw Mitchell, even though I don't think Mitchell was 100% healthy yesterday. But I think that more likely Harden is closer to what we saw with Conley yesterday, where Conley was just out there kind of eating minutes. And I think the fact that they pushed Conley so hard in that game actually is what really cost him that game. Not to really, I got to give credit to Conley for being out there playing when he was injured. But if they wouldn't have been pushing him and forcing him when he wasn't healthy, they could have done more with Ingles and Clarkson and some of these other guys. So I do worry that we might see that a little bit with Harden. He's not 100%. Certainly Harden it's a little bit of a different story. Like Harden at like 80% is still better than someone like Bruce Brown, right? Harden has to get down to like 50% to be that. Whereas Conley was maybe if he's at 80%, he's not as good as some of those other guys. So it is worthwhile to still have Harden there, but it's not the same Harden that you typically would have. And I think Durant knows that. I think even Harden knows that as he's given Durant all the opportunities. So yeah, I think Durant is a really good guy to go with. The prop bets for Durant are super high. So his over under on points is all the way up at 36.5. That's one of the highest totals that you'll see all year long. And if he plays about 43 minutes, is what I was kind of pacing. He's kind of been averaging at about 30 points per 36 minutes here in the playoffs. So he needs to play about 43 minutes to get that rate. I think he has a good chance of even going over that. So I don't know that I want to bet that because I think it's a pretty fair line. If we assume that Harden is kind of still going to be the same. If Harden comes back and is healthy and he just has a great game like Donovan Mitchell, then that Durant under is going to look pretty good as well. So I think that's a long-winded way for me to say I do like going with Durant, but he's got a lot of risk as well.
Yeah, I think you explained the logic pretty well. So yeah, I get it. To me, I'm going to buy in on Durant here. The fact that he had 30 shot attempts last game and, the fact that he shot 50% is somehow disappointment, I think is a wild thing to expect from a guy. But I think the series is on the line here. I mentioned yesterday to talk about elimination games. Like some people in the YouTube chat were saying, oh, like Donovan Mitchell's not going to go his game time decision. And that's something too, like if you don't follow it that closely, like we do here doing shows every day, like I totally get why people might think that's the case. But these guys are gamers. And to me, I think Durant is going to push all that usage that he can. And even at 37.5% is what I'm giving him today, I think, that's enough for me to feel really comfortable about A, taking some overs on prize picks for his points. I think that's not a bad line. But B, just believing Kevin Durant and DFS is my guy. First and foremost, that is going to be the approach I'm going to have today. And it's always great, Steve. I do these shows with you and Alex, and I'm like, cool. I'm glad I'm at loggerheads with what you guys are doing because that's always feels good. Very contrarian to go against the guys who are the top 10 players in the world.
Yep.
Let's talk about James Harden a little bit more. The price tag is going to be basically where it would be if he were healthy. And I think if you mark him down to where you could expect him to be with the hamstring injury, as Steve was just talking about there, he's basically skipping around the court, doing what he can. He's pulling back on plays. It was Doris Burke called it out pretty heavily on the actual broadcast. But yeah, Harden pulling one play back that seemed like an obvious fast break that normally he would drive head first into, whether going to the rim or just jacking up a three or whatever he may do. And it does seem like he's limited enough, Steve, but we have Harden projected relatively close to where he'd be normally. So how are you handling that? Are you muting Harden? Are you leaning in on Harden? Because I have to say for the first game that he played, I went heavy Harden. It did not work out. I think last game might have been a little more logical to go there. He outscored Durant, I believe, fantasy-wise by the end of the night, or at least was in range. Are you willing to get to Harden with the field today? He's projected for 71% ownership on FanDuel, a lot at MVP, and on DraftKings, he'll be around 60%.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to probably stay under the field on him. I just think that there's a lot of risk, and I think a lot of people are going to assume after last game he's all the way back to healthy. I just don't see that he is. The line is 2, I think, right now for Brooklyn. I feel like if they were at home with the healthy Harden completely, I think that would be closer to 4-ish. So I think that's a really tough one to determine. One, if you want to bet that game, also how you feel about the health of Harden is basically going to be if you want to bet the game or not. I don't have a really strong take other than I think that Harden's not 100%, and I think that that's baked in enough into the line that the line is okay. But from a DFS perspective, I don't think that his ownership is getting a big enough hit and his price isn't getting a big enough hit. So I'm not off of him completely. I've still got looks like maybe 30% of shares of him on DraftKings, which you were saying, I think his ownership was around.
Yeah, we got a 56 60. Right now. So yeah, so you're under it, but you're covering your ass enough there. If he somehow has a miraculous healing, got some nice massages for himself, then you'll still be there in the hunt.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's exactly it.
Talk to me about Joe Harris a little bit here, because he's a player, price coming up. He's certainly been rendered useless in some of these games and is a guy that can disappear in the mix, but does seem, just overall based on what the Bucks do and the fact that he's playing enough minutes today, we have projected for 40 minutes today. Is Joe Harris a player willing to get to is the question I would have, because I'm going to be there a little bit. It looks like actually I'll be there above the field. We're currently projecting the field to be at 20%. He's not cheap, but there is a pathway for him to be useful today, Steve. And on a slate where everybody's going to be appropriately owned for the most part, I'm willing to take a little more of a shot on a guy like Joe Harris than I would personally like to, but that's what the numbers are giving me. So how are you handling Joe Harris? And I guess if there are any other nets that you want to start to segue over to as a pivot point to Joe Harris, or I guess in lieu of, feel free to throw them in too.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit lower on Joe Harris than what the field is. He's definitely had a really nice series. He got 36 minutes last game, and I think he's going to get a fair amount of minutes as well again this game. He's also had a little bit of his rebounding has also been pretty good so far this round, as well as his assists. So I think that he's definitely a guy that they're going to rely on pretty heavily again for this game. He's not going to get the minutes that Durant and those type of guys are going to get, but we have him at 38 minutes, which I think is pretty fair given where he's been the last few games. So I think I don't have a big problem with him. It's just, when you look at the price point for him, 7,200 on DraftKings, it's kind of like in that range with nobody, I guess. So there's not a big pivot guy to go over or under on him. I rather probably to another guy that you're talking about, or just saying another guy on Brooklyn, I would rather try is Landry Shamet, actually. He's down at 2,600. He's not like my favorite play that he's going to, really break the slate, but he's a good pivot off of Connaughton at the same price. And actually, even if you run both Shamet and Connaughton together, then you really can get a lot of the good plays together. So I think that he's a pretty interesting one. He's had a little bit of a increase in his minutes here these last two games, 22 minutes and 27, the last two, versus going back before that 11, 17, 16, and 12. So these have been the most key games in the series. So I feel like his minutes are fairly safe, and we're actually projecting him a little bit conservatively, I would say. So I think that he has a pretty good upside, and for his price point, even though he's not a big time scorer, he can help you get some of those other guys that are into your lineups.
So I guess the one guy I thought might have been a price point pivot that I thought perhaps you would go to, though honestly I'm with you on not going that way. Blake Griffin, who did play 30 minutes last game. Today we have him in for 35 minutes, and last game he didn't close that one out in the fourth quarter, wasn't on the court, but there was a possibility, I guess, he could have come back on if the game stayed competitive and they wanted to move away from Shamet, I believe it was, who was in there at the end. So how are you feeling about Blake Griffin? Because he's the guy I'm basically choosing Joe Harris over him with my lineups, though they're both going to be underowned, or not underowned, but mostly unowned on DraftKings, a little more represented on Fanduel. 20% expected ownership for Harris, a little bit less than that for Blake Griffin. Are you getting any Blake at all? Are you feeling like he can earn more minutes? I guess would be the other question I have, because it feels like he should be able to, but he's also looked kind of banged up and hasn't been quite as good per minute as he was earlier in the series. So he's one of those guys that I'm going to have less in the field of, but it feels like a spot that just maybe could have more upside than I'm seeing.
Yeah. So what do you think is like the most minutes he could play if they went out and said to him, give me as many minutes as you can give us at his age and what he's looking like right now. What do you think the max he can get to is?
I feel like he could probably get to 33 to 35. So I don't have an issue with the projection for what it is there. So I think that's the range, but, and that's basically how it would look last game if he got in when in the fourth quarter. I don't know that he would have, but that's how I think it would have been last time out.
Yeah. That's kind of where I'm thinking as well. And it's, for that, it just kind of limits me a little bit with him. You're paying a good amount. He's at 7,800, and on DraftKings, I don't know let's see. He looks like he's on 9,000 on FanDuel. Yeah, that's pretty good for FanDuel actually. But with his minutes being limited, and I just don't think that he can get stretched out as long as some of these other guys can and be as effective, just because he's getting a little bit older and banged up. So I'm okay with him, but just, I'm not a big fan.
Yeah, I'm with you on the same page there. And he, to me, if I'm getting a guy a little bit less than the field, and he's also already low owned, it gives me a little bit of, I wouldn't say concern, but just something that feels like it could be a blind spot. So if you want to take your stabs at Blake Griffin, I honestly don't think he's going to come up a ton in optimizers today based on the projections that I've seen across the industry. And a guy who, there's a pathway there to get a few more minutes, even though the fact that he hasn't closed the last few games certainly gives you some of that pause there. You've talked about Jeff Green earlier, and guys, we have Live Before Lock coming up next. And apparently it'll be me on Live Before Lock with Greg Ehrenberg, because our boy Eytan is, I don't know if it's a public thing or not, but he's having a lovely occasion in a man's life. So you can assume whatever that is. I don't tweet Eytan with whatever you think that could be, I guess, at Shander Show. But I'll be here hanging out with Greg right after this one. But tell me your thoughts about Jeff Green, because you mentioned earlier as a play that can be there as a semi-value, a guy that opens up the roster constructions you need to get to. And we've seen him have a really high upside day. We've also seen him have a game where he got outscored by a lot of people and was the pivot point to get away from the chalk. So how are you approaching him today with about half the field expected to be on him and probably a 50-50 shot at him being in that winning lineup?
Yeah, he's one that I am pretty much aligned with the field on, actually. So I think that I'm not taking a big stance on him one way or the other. I do think that he's a good captain that you can own. I think he's a good utility, and I have probably a little bit more than the field, it looks like, but not super heavy.
Yeah, so Jeff Green looks like a play on FanDuel, going to be a little less represented than on DraftKings, but definitely somebody who's getting that run. And you mentioned Landry Shamet, and I guess we could talk about the remaining Brooklyn players. Nick Claxton, it feels like there's still some shot that he can get a few more minutes. I will have basically the field's 6% projected ownership that's going towards him. But Bruce Brown, to me, a guy that I think is hard to get to. They didn't price him down to a minimum salary, and he was basically extricated from the rotation last time out. But Bruce Brown, Nick Claxton, some people in the chat were talking about Mike James being viable if he gets minutes, though he basically seems like he's lost his shot to get those minutes that he could have gotten if he ran hot when Kyrie first went out. Are there any of these peripheral nets that you're willing to get to? And I guess if you want to throw the Thanasis Antetokounmpo in the mix too on the other side, I guess we can include him, just the peripheral pieces overall.
Yeah, I don't think so. It looks like pretty much all those guys I'm not in on. So if you're going with any of them, you're going to be on your own. But it might be a good way to get unique. And if they do get some minutes somehow, you could have things work out. The one that could, I guess, work out potentially is Thanos. If it looks like he's the lowest of the guys that actually could get some minutes, so he's a little bit lower priced than Connaughton. So if there is a build that you need a little bit of extra money, you could use him and get something to work out there. So that might be an okay strategy.
And it looks like about actually 18 of the field will be playing Thanasis today on DraftKings, only 1.4% on FanDuel, but on FanDuel, you're probably not expecting that to be a play that works out any percent of the time. So keep that in mind there. And I guess let's talk quickly about some of the props. Actually, Landry Shamet, I feel like we haven't given enough of a cosign to. I know you mentioned him earlier, but give me one last take on Landry Shamet, because I know he's a play that's going to end up in a lot of people's lineups. We talked about him earlier being the guy who won some court time over Blake Griffin, and it certainly seemed like he was going to be a meaningful part of the rotation in that last do or die game, or, but leading into a do or die game for Brooklyn. How are you feeling about Shamet here? And I guess, is he the value play you would hold up amongst all others? And would you rank him ahead of Connaughton or behind him?
Yeah, I think Shamet is a really good one, especially on DraftKings. I would rate Connaughton higher, just that extra savings. Plus, I think he has a little bit higher upside, so I will go with him there. On DraftKings or on FanDuel, though, I think Shamet is really quite nice. His ownership is very low, and so he's at 7,500 on there. I think you could go more with him than Connaughton there, and he looks like he's my maybe fourth highest at the utility spot. So I guess I shouldn't be totally bad on Blake Griffin. Blake Griffin I actually have as my top guy on utility spot there.
So you see Blake, so you're believing in Blake now. Apparently he looks as young as ever in your eyes all of a sudden.
On FanDuel he does anyways. I'm hoping for those extra minutes.
Let's talk about some prop bets here before we close out the show. So hit that like button if you can, guys. We got 680 people in here, only 146 likes. I feel like get us to 200. That feels like a good move here. So smash that like button, help us out here. And let's talk about some of the prop bets. And Steve, you mentioned some of the ones that you had liked earlier about Bryn, Forbes, and basically taking the unders on all of them. But overall, it seems like we have a good amount of props that are having actually decent win rates. And of course, I clicked my Excel to shrink. Oh, here we go. This one's fine. James Harden, the rebound over actually looks like the top prop on the board for Brooklyn. 88% chance of hitting. And this is something where I am not going to get a lot of Harden today. In my DFS lineups, I will be under the field like you, but I'm probably not covering my ass as intelligently as you are. And I feel like taking some of the props on Harden overall in the books might be the better move. We also have the points over being 77%. Do you have any feel here, Steve? And I guess, is that a hedge you would consider for yourself, where if you are coming under on Harden, and if you're like me, really not getting any exposure at all, are you willing to get some prop bets on him in the hopes that just he plays the minutes probably, even though he's not going to be 100% of himself with that hamstring?
Yeah, I think that is a good way to hedge your risk if you are fading him, because you're getting your money in on a situation that it is a good one. So a lot of times I'm not a big fan of hedging situations, because you're taking a plus EV situation, hopefully, right, your DFS lineups, and combining it with a hedge that is minus EV, because if you want your guy to blow up, you're not going to want to go the other way, or vice versa. But in this case, we do have him as a good expected ROI. I do think that there is some risk with his playing time as well. Well, not his playing time as much. I think they're going to play him no matter what, but just his efficiency, I think, is at risk. But his points projection is quite low. 18.5. I mean, that's pretty low for him. So they're definitely not giving him the respect of being healthy at all in the prop market. And it's a good chance that he can go over that. Another one I think that that I really like to do the same thing from a hedging perspective is on Connaughton, actually. So we have Connaughton, all of his under bets, or at least on his points, and yeah, that one. It rebounds a little bit of plus EV as well. And so points and rebounds, but mainly the points. We have a pretty good under bet on that. And I think it's pretty good because our projection is fairly aggressive for him. And it's a projection that's getting him into a lot of lineups as well. So I feel pretty good about the ROI on that bet. And if you're playing him at a high rate like I am and your DFS lineups, then he can be that bet can be a direct pivot against some of those lineups that you have in there. So maybe you can win both of them as well.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. And yeah, you mentioned here that the Connaughton rebounds under 63% chance of hitting the under, the points under 58% chance. So that's definitely one way to get some Connaughton hedging if you are. And not that you have to hedge, but if you want to hedge and you have legal odds, no reason not to take advantage of them. Make sure to check out that props tool. I dropped the link earlier in chat. But you can find it on the top bar at Awesemo for whenever you want to get your prop bets into your life. And of course, you can always go to oddshopper.com to check for the odds and the win percentage and ROI percentage tools as well. Steve, I feel like now we can yield the floor and I can hang out for one more hour with another new friend here. It's like Pee-wee's Playhouse. I got people coming in and out. Actually, Steve, one thing you might not be aware of, a few times on shows where I've been talking about your office hours, because I'm so impressed with when you do those and like the stuff that you talk about and try to break down high-level concepts and all of that. I've accidentally called you Steve the Buzzard twice, as though you were our puppet in some sort of Sesame Street style show. And I want to apologize, but also I feel like, we had to have success with puppets on the channel. So if you want to get a Steve the Buzzard in the mix, I'm not saying it's a bad idea.
That might be a good one. I'm gonna have to think about that for some future shows for sure. And yeah, definitely, if you are a member, come swing by the office hours. I normally do those every Thursday. Get a lot of questions. A lot of people afterwards sending me messages, DMs to ask further questions. But yeah, it's good to be able to help the community and all of our folks be able to, think about what question is on their mind and how I can hopefully help them get it resolved and improve their game and all of our games. Everyone that's in a lot of times I even rethink some of my own stuff based on some of their questions. So it's a lot of fun for everyone.
Yeah, I personally always read through the chats whenever you do them on the office hours. People hopefully ask some good questions, but if you are a premium member, make sure to show up to them. Steve tags the channels in them and go check them out and honestly take advantage of it. It's like college where people oftentimes didn't go to professors' office hours and like they actually do add value and help you get a better grade in college and hopefully the same for DFS as well. So make sure to go follow at Steve Buzzard and follow me at Chris Spags. See when I'm doing a show next. Oh, right. That's right after this one. So stay tuned. Steve's going to swap out. Greg will come back in. I guess we'll have the Chiron in between. So hang out here and I'll see you guys in like a minute or so, whatever. I don't know how to long time no see. Welcome to the NBA Live Before Lock show. We'll take you through all the finer points of the slate. And I should have gotten the money hat between shows so we could do money time as well. Maybe I'll do that when the camera switches over to Greg. But I am Chris Spags, joined by a man who you know from seeing all the channel all the time here. You know him as Nerd Ass Greg. He's Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
Listen, first of all, shout out to Spags, who pulling back-to-back shows. And by the way, I had no clue I was doing the show with Spags. Does the audience know what happened? Like, did that get revealed during last show?
I didn't know if I don't know if Eytan tweets so much he must tweeted about it. I said it was an important time in a man's life, so maybe they thought he got his boy period.
Okay. Well, hey, listen, it wasn't that far off. But anyway, so I was supposed to be doing today's show with Eytan. Him and I usually work on Saturday night. And I was getting ready for the show, thinking I was doing with Eytan. I did some errands this afternoon. I got ready for the show. I was hanging out with my dad, Father's Day weekend. And then right before the show's about to start, I look on Slack and I have a message that Nolan, who I assume that the people watching don't know who Nolan is, but he does not do basketball content for us. But all of a sudden he's like, hey, Eytan's wife is having a baby. You're doing the show with me now. It's like, okay, I could roll with it. No big deal. And then you stepped up. You're doing instead pulling double duty. So much appreciated.
Yeah, so if you did watch the deeper dive right before this one, just pretend all the takes are new because I'm not the exact same ones, but Greg will have new ones. Maybe he'll argue with me more, and maybe he'll have some different ones to bring to the table, but we'll talk about that. But first of all, let's get one more shout out in for our sponsor over at Prize Picks, who is, of course, simplifying daily fantasy sports for all you guys out there. And I mentioned on the earlier show, this is my read, but I'm just going to speak from the heart because I see it all the time on Twitter, on the YouTube chat. People are just frustrated with the DFS process, or even people who love it, and they're just like, I don't get why I'm not winning. I don't know why. Like, I'm doing everything right. I'm doing everything right. And that can be how it goes. You can just be banging your head against the wall for months, sometimes even years, depending on the person you are. But Prize Picks, it simplifies it all for you. All you have to do is pick 2, 3, 4, 5 guys on there. If you pick 5 guys right and reject the over or under on their projected fantasy point total for the day, you can win up to 10x your fees right away. And that's something where, hey, you're not going to get the 100K payout, but you can win consistently night after night if you have a great system in place. So go check out Prize Picks. They have contests for the NBA, or not contests. They have picks for the NBA, for the MLB, for the WNBA, the NFL, and even esports. You can make your picks together across all those sports. You can find 5 athletes from every single league out there and put them together to make your picks for the day. But there's a lot of ways to win over at Prize Picks. So go check them out over at prizepicks.com. And also make sure to download them in the App Store or on Google Play. Use that promo code Awesemo when you do sign up, because they'll get you a $100 deposit match. That's one of the best match bonuses you will find out there. So use that promo code Awesemo over at Prize Picks. And Greg, do you have any Prize Picks for yourself that you would like to bring to the people? I mentioned earlier that I do think some of the Kevin Durant points overs appealed to me, but I'm curious if you had any Prize Picks for yourself that you would actually put some money on a line for.
Yeah, so I'm going to compare some of the Prize Picks. And by the way, I'm typically more interested in the fantasy score Prize Picks than the single stat DFS. Also, people who aren't familiar, the Prize Picks fantasy scoring is the exact same as Fanduel. So if you want to go to our site and you want to compare our projections to the Prize Picks scoring, just go to the Fanduel projections. You can compare them. Which one did you say that you liked?
I like the Durant points over on there, where they have them at, let me make sure the line's still the same, but they have them at 35.5. I have them being at 38.5. So that's the one that I would take.
I'm 35.5 is a pretty big number. I don't feel
it's game 7, Greg.
So all of a sudden you start just scoring a lot more points. I mean, I do think there's, not to get too, how many minutes do you expect Kevin Durant to play tonight?
So I have the Awesemo minutes projection as the baseline for all my data. And for him, they have him at 46.5 today.
Yeah, I think there's a pretty good chance he plays the entire game, but it just seems so, like, I gave him 45 minutes, but it also seems so ridiculous to just be working out projections for a game. Just be like, I guess he plays all 48, but he did it 2 games ago in a game 5. And I think there's a pretty good chance he does it again in a game 7. But let's see some of the individual fantasy point totals. I like James Harden over 40.5. That's the one I feel best about. So Harden, even though his leg clearly isn't 100%, he's still playing a whole bunch of minutes. He played 46 his first game back from the hamstring injury. Then last game, he ends up playing 40 minutes, actually scored over 40 in that last game. So, with that in mind, I think he's going to continue to get healthier the more that we see him out on the court. And, the fact that he's going to be playing likely north of 40 minutes, when would we expect Harden to even score less than 50 fantasy points in that kind of minute share? So, over under 40.5 is the number. And I feel pretty strong about over 40.5.
Yeah, so there you go. There are some prize picks you can play for yourself. And again, check out the site, download them in the Google Play Store or the App Store. And they're also at prizepicks.com. And honestly, the interface is really great. Some of the sites out there, they do a good job. They have a good product, but sometimes the interface is not quite where you want it to be. Prize Picks, I feel like pretty seamless and one of the better ones out there. So go take a look over at prizepicks.com or download them in the App Store or on the Google Play Store. So here's the debate that I had with Steve Buzzard last show, Greg. And as I said it to Steve outright, that I always love that there's always at least one take on shows where I do with Steve or Alex where I'm just like, I vehemently disagree and I'm going the other way. And it always feels good to vehemently disagree with the guys who've made more money in their careers playing DFS than I will certainly ever sniff. But I think Kevin Durant's the better play in the slate than Giannis. And that's the hill that I'm going to die on tonight. And I'm looking more at the rates the last two games with Harden out there. No Kyrie, Durant taking over a lot of the game. There's some risk. Giannis played a little more one-on-one defense on Durant. Durant certainly didn't seem to love that quite as much as shooting over the Drew Holidays or PJ Tuckers of the world. But overall, I feel like Kevin Durant in the spot to me, I'm projected higher. I am giving him an aggressive usage rate that's in line with where he's been this series because I think that's just how it goes down. Whether he hits those shots or not, we'll find out. But 30 shot attempts last game, to me, too hard to overlook. So I'll have more Durant than Giannis. Both will be court parts of what I'm doing today, but that's my stand. So are you in agreement with me or are you going to go the other way?
So I don't agree with you, but I also don't think it matters because I think you want to have Kevin Durant and Giannis in most of, if not all of your lineups together anyway, because I think both of them are going to play nearly the entire game. They're also the two best fantasy producers in the game right now. We consider that James Harden is at less than 100%. So I have Giannis projected for more fantasy points, but I think it's such a high priority to get him and Durant into as many lineups as possible that it's kind of splitting hairs, and I think it's irrelevant anyway.
Okay, so based on the rates that I'm giving Durant, which are largely just me working, I talked about it in a little more depth on the last show, but I'll just repeat it because I'm sure we have people who are coming in between streams. But keeping Durant's assist rate where it's been throughout the year, which is at 27.5%, though he has been about 38% the last two games where Harden's been in the mix, but not at his full capacity. I did give him the rebound rate of the last two games where he's been a 15% rebound rate guy, and I just think maybe that's a little aggressive. That could be the one thing that I might be overestimating a bit. But the usage, I'm giving him 37.5%. To me, that makes him project better than Giannis. And the fact he's a little bit cheaper on DraftKings is why I'm pushing that way. So that's me showing my work. I think Greg's take, obviously Steve's takes are going to be very sound, but if I'm doing something different today and it's just marginally different, like I'll still get enough Giannis, that's the way that I want to go. But the question I'm going to have for you, Greg, you mentioned James Harden for your prize picks. Are you playing him tonight with the field? On DraftKings, we're going to see him around 56% ownership. On Fanduel, looks like he'll be over 70% and also heavily featured at MVP. So what are you doing with him today?
Yeah, so I think that James Harden is ultimately going to come underneath that ownership projection just because we've seen that the last couple of games and last game even pretty significantly where people were pretty reactionary to his hamstring injury in the first game and just didn't want to play him last game. I think last game he had a fairly similar ownership projection to what he has now, and I think off the top of my head he ended up being 22% owned in the big contest on DraftKings. So I think he's going to come underweight to that 56% projected ownership number. And I like being overweight to Harden anyway, though. So I think that even though he hasn't been, totally 100% the last couple of games, still, look at the minutes load, 46 minutes 2 games ago, didn't have the best fantasy game, but then last game played 40 minutes, scored over 40 fantasy points. Even a limited Harden, I expect to score more fantasy points than Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton. And also, I think he's going to look slightly better than he did last game. And that's enough for me to have him projected right around 50 fantasy points. I have no clue what to do with his rate stats. So a lot of it's just kind of a gut feel. But to me, I still think Harden's so good. And this game is, obviously such a high leverage situation. It doesn't get any higher leverage than this. I think Harden's going to play somewhere in the neighborhood of 44 to 46 minutes again. And even if he isn't able to, drive to the basket, he's still going to be taking his step back threes. And he's going to be passing the ball. He's going to be initiating. I think he's going to rack up assists. So I think that Harden is still somebody to get to more than Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton.
Okay, so yeah, I'm on the opposite side of this one. And, again, if you're watching both shows, you're sorry for repeating takes, but Greg will react to them like it's new, and that's the main thing. But Harden, to me, I'm going to barely be playing him tonight. I will be playing a lot more Middleton, a lot more Drew. And to me, Harden, what I did with the rates, and I agree that it is sort of hard to snuff it out. He's been at around 18% usage the last 2 games with him being banged up. I gave him 20%. I feel comfortable with that mark. I also knocked his assist rate down to 25%, even though it's been a little bit lower. And the rebound rate, too, I shaved a good portion off of that. I have an 8% rebound rate, and he's been normally around a 12% and change guy. But Harden, I just think he's not the same guy. And the ownership, I agree, it does feel a little bit lofty. We actually got updated ownership, which we'll talk about in 15 minutes. I'll have Greg talk for a period and I'll go get the money hat. We'll do the whole fucking spiel anyway. But Harden, if he's going to be anywhere near this, or if there are people trying to be contrarian going his way, and I thought he looked better last game, still not good by any stretch, but I did think he looked better. I do think it's all about him being able to work around whatever his clear failings are. And I think this could be a risky spot for me, but I just don't feel comfortable treating him like the same guy. Like, I think the projection that we have for him today is basically treating him like he's going to be pretty close to where he's been. And that to me is like a pretty big risk spot, where I think Steve Buzzard on the last show had the best idea, which is like play 30% Harden. I think that to me is where I would like to go. It's not what I'm going to do, but it's where I think the logic is. So I guess if you had a cap on Harden's ownership, or a benchmark you tried to get to, if we were to assume the ownership is going to be right here at 57% on Draftkings, now 75% on Fanduel, where does that mark feel like for you with James Harden?
Too low. Just because, well, number one, though, I actually don't think that's going to be the number. So that's going to change my outlook a little bit, but I would really be stunned if James Harden's in close to 60% lineup. So I know this doesn't directly answer your question. But to me, by the way, people can't see Spags off screen. He's getting the money. He's probably not even listening to what I'm saying right now, but so with James Harden, and I know Spags had asked me if he's actually 60% on, do I want to be over or underweight to the number? If he was actually right around the 60% number, I would want to be under. But my expectation is that he's going to be well under that number. And that's just what my intuition is going to be. So one of the reasons I want to be heavier on Harden is because I don't actually think the field is going to be getting here at that number.
I don't know what you're talking about, Greg. I was listening to everything you said, and I've been sitting here the whole time wearing the exact same hat. So I think that's the main thing I'd point to. But I agree. I think it's hard to believe he'd get to that number. And on FanDuel in particular, like, I just don't think the field's going to get to 25% at MVP. And I think that's one of the things we've talked about in particular in some of our shows, Greg, where like the ownership projections, I think are, I want to say utopian, because they're certainly not utopian, but like they are looking at an idealistic world of how everybody's going to approach things. And I don't think people are going to see Harden as being the same dude and have him at the same rates and all that. On FanDuel, though, you are getting a discount. So I guess the question for you would be, on DraftKings, he's priced like normal James Harden. I think the argument is to go under there, or at least, for me to go under there. On FanDuel, though, if he's 13,000 and Giannis and Durant are much more expensive, and he's priced with Drew and Chris Middleton a little bit more, are you closer to getting to where the field is for Harden there? And are you willing to play him at 25% at MVP?
Not at 25% at MVP, but so I know that you said that you really reduced the rates of Harden. Does that mean you have Chris Middleton project for more just raw fantasy points?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So I do not, but also once again, he's a very difficult player to project because, how do you look at one of the guys who's one of the best fantasy, in fact, he's a better fantasy producer than Kevin Durant, if he's actually healthy. And it's so hard to put a number on it to know what percentage healthy is he. And then even if we said, like, I don't know, he was 50% last game, maybe it's a little bit more now, but how does that change his rate? So one thing about projection systems and how the ownership is ultimately calculated is it's going to be based on how these players get projected. And a lot of people are projecting James Harden still fairly highly across the industry. That's why his ownership is so high. Like, I don't see anybody who's projecting James Harden for like 35 or 40 fantasy points. But with that in mind, I think there's going to be a lot of people that just look at optimizers or whatever and just be like, well, Xing out James Harden, I don't want anything to do with that. So if I was to ask you, what do you think is an actual, like, beyond the ownership projection we have for him, if you were to just guess a number blindly, what would you say is a fair over under for James Harden's ownership on DraftKings today? Totally in utility and captain.
I think it'll be closer to 40% than 57. And I think that even might be aggressive. I think Steve Buzzard's going to be right where the field is. Like, I think everybody's going to think like he didn't be like, oh, if Awesemo's projecting him for 60%, that might be a little high. It's probably gonna be closer to 50. So I'll get, 3/5 of that. And I think that's the way it's going to handle it. And I think everybody that thinks they're going to be, a little bit under the field at 30% is actually going to end up with the field on where he is.
Yeah, he was 22% last game, and he played a little bit better last game than he did game before. So I think 30% is probably reasonable.
Yeah, so I agree. So that's to me the mark, and the ownership projections will give you all of them here in 10 minutes, even though, again, I'm wearing the same hat. So obviously, how could it be money time? But I would say that I agree the ownership projection seems a little bit aggressive. There's also somebody asking a question earlier, and I don't want to make fun because it is funny, but the guy asked, like, how do we know the ownership and what it's going to be for the slate? And I just need to point out, it is a projection. Maybe sometimes I don't enunciate that well enough, or other people on the channel don't point it out well enough. It's a guess as to what the ownership is going to be. So it's using algorithms and data factors factors and all that stuff that puts in. Obviously, it's not just, holding your finger in the air and trying to guess from that. But it's worth pointing out, Greg, because sometimes people get confused and think that we do, in fact, have some proprietary algorithm that's tied into Fanduel or DraftKings.
It would be pretty cool if we did, but but we don't. A lot of it's, based on what the projections are, and then other stuff that goes over my head. I wouldn't be able to calculate ownership by myself, but it's kind of similar to if we say that, Giannis is projected for 64 fantasy points tonight. It's a similar type of projection. It's still just a guess. I don't know that Giannis is scoring 64, but that's about what I expect from him.
Yep, I think that's a fair way to look at it. So keep that in mind here. And again, we'll talk about it coming up a little more in 10 minutes. If you want to get the data for yourself before we get to money time, feel free to go to awesemo.com/join. And now it's a different promo code from the last show too. It's NBA Live Before Lock. That'll get you 25% off of your first week of Awesemo Plus. Go check out all the packages we have at awesemo.com/join. You can also get yourself just an NBA package. If you're tired of NBA and just want to get MLB, you can do that too. But make sure to go to awesemo.com/join and see all those options for yourself. Talk to me about some of the Milwaukee stars now. And I feel like you've given your take on the Giannis Kevin Durant debate, but relative to his ownership at captain, relative to his ownership at MVP on FanDuel, how are you approaching Giannis? Are you with the field at captain? Are you going above it? I gave my take, Greg, that I gave you a lot throughout the year of trying to cut out the highest owned captain on Showdown slates. And let's just say Showdown King Steve Buzzard was not as big of a fan as I've been at times. And I'll defend my take for one lineup that I think that's still the move to go to. But are you willing to be with a chalky Giannis captain today? Are you willing to be with a chalky Giannis MVP? Or are you taking him more at other spots?
I am pretty close to the field with Giannis at captain. It's so hard to differentiate on these games. Truth be told, I hate the showdown contest for the Nets Bucks game because these teams are playing 5-man rotations at this point. So the last two games, or the last two contests we've had players end up in the optimal lineup that weren't even in the rotation. Or so two games ago, Tyler Johnson ends up in the optimal lineup, plays 0 minutes. Last game, Alize Johnson and who was the other? So Alize Johnson, one of the other end of the bench players for the Nets, end up in the optimal lineup because they played 1 minute in garbage time and scored a couple of fantasy points. I actually think something similar is going to happen tonight. I think there's a pretty good chance that somebody who scores 0 or scores 2 fantasy points ends up in the optimal lineup just because so many minutes are going to go towards Holiday, Middleton, Giannis, and Harden. They're going to need salary savings somewhere. And I think there's a good chance it comes from somebody who doesn't step on the court. But to answer your question about the other Bucks guys in general and Giannis, I'm about even with him at the captain spot, but I do like getting a little weird at captain just to try to save salary on the slate.
Yeah, to me, so I am going to get different at captain by not playing Giannis quite as much as the field. I will play more Durant at captain, though he'll also be pretty well owned and honestly not that far behind the ownership for captain, which we'll talk about in a second here. But yeah, I got more Kevin Durant at captain. I got more Jeff Green at captain. And I even got, I guess, how low will you go for captain today, Greg? Because this is something I know the YouTube chat was talking about earlier, and I'm looking at my exposures now and I actually did get this direction that people were talking about. And I don't love it, but Pat Connaughton at captain, I think, is going to give you lineups that do project pretty well, and also decrease the ownership product relative to some of the higher owned lineups or higher projected owned lineups. Are you willing to play a Connaughton at captain or a Landry Shamet or these guys, or are you mostly concentrated to the Kevin Durant's and Giannis's? And I guess, are you also willing to go to the middle tier of guys like Middleton and Drew Holiday and all of that? Because that is something that sometimes people don't do as well. So I'm just wondering how you're approaching captain for this particular slate.
Yeah, well, one thing about these guys, if you're trying to differentiate with ownership amongst this price amongst this kind of middle tier to lower tier, they're all owned basically the same in our projections. Pat Connaughton, Jeff Green, Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday, Landry Shamet, even Brook Lopez, all these guys are 6 to 8% owned. So it's really flat there. And then it just kind of becomes who's the best play of the group. And, to me, if you're going cheap, it is still Pat Connaughton because he's the only cheap guy who I actually expect to play really significant minutes tonight. I think that Landry Shamet, he's definitely going to be in the rotation, except I don't think he's going to play nearly as many minutes as Pat Connaughton. And, the other cheap guys that we have here are likely not going to step on the court. The only two ones that are viable from a projection standpoint are Connaughton and Landry Shamet, and I prefer Connaughton.
John Doe in the chat, that I'm going to assume that's probably not a real name on YouTube. Is there any reason to play guys like Claxton, Portis, Mike James, or Bruce Brown? They have literally played basically none the past 2 games, and he also put in a wide variety of both exclamation point and question mark emojis. I didn't know that was a combination emoji that exists, but John Doe did. Greg, I guess, are you playing any of these guys? Because I will say I did get some Nick Claxton. I don't love it, but I think that's just a guy who's projected to get a little bit of minutes, so he popped up to me. I didn't get any any of the zero projection guys, and I think Bruce Brown would qualify, Portis would qualify, Mike James should qualify as well. Are you willing to play those guys? And I guess how much are you playing those guys? Because I think that you just sort of implicated that's one strategy you're looking at. So what's the number for you look like for them?
Yeah, I have a lot of these guys in like 5 to 10% of lineups. I actually kind of like, this is all relative, but I think Elijah Bryant is a viable play on this slate just because he's actually been in the Bucks rotation the last couple of games. So the last 3 games, Elijah Bryant has played 6 minutes, 3 minutes, and 4 minutes. Let's say Elijah Bryant goes out there and hits 1 shot and grabs a rebound, maybe scores 3 fantasy points. And Kevin Durant, Giannis Antetokounmpo, James Harden, Chris Middleton, maybe a bunch of these guys have big games. You're going to need those guys in the lineup because other players are not going to score fantasy points if all of the stars are playing 44 to 48 minutes tonight. And that's where I think we could see a really similar situation to a couple of games ago where Tyler Johnson ends up in the optimal lineup playing 0 minutes. But Elijah Bryant is somebody who we don't even have in our ownership projections right now. And he's actually in the Bucks rotation the last couple of games, just not playing big minutes, nor is he a good fantasy producer. But I actually think getting 2 or 3 fantasy points from Elijah Bryant, that could be something that differentiates a lineup if the studs, all go off and have big games.
Elijah Bryant, though, the minutes last game, and I know this because I had 20% Elijah Bryant last game, so that shows you I'm ahead of the curve for this one, but he was out of the rotation last game. He only got in because of the blowout minutes, so I think that he is not likely to play very at all. That said, I agree that the build where you just have these guys in and you can take maybe even a 0 or just hope that they get 1 minute of ceremonial blowout run at the end when the Nets throw in the towel or the Bucks throw in the towel, whatever the case may be. I think it's a viable approach. It's not one I'm taking today because, again, I just got burned by it last game. I got burned by Bobby Portis the game before that. So to me, I'm not doing it, but I see merit in the approach. It's just not one I think you can get different enough without doing that. So that's basically where I landed with it.
Yeah, listen, I think in almost every other situation, I think it's a dumb strategy, but we've literally seen it win 2 slates in a row for this particular game. And there's a reason why. This is such I can't ever remember seeing a series where Kevin Durant is playing legitimately potentially 48 minutes tonight. The last 2 games he played 40 minutes, although that was a game also that because it was a blowout or else he would have played more. And the Nets weren't even really all that competitive in that one. But the games before, 48 minutes for Kevin Durant, 42 minutes, 43 minutes. Then James Harden the last couple games, even on a bad leg, played 40 minutes and played 45 minutes. And you just have to consider if these guys are going to be playing that many minutes, number one, that's minutes that don't go to other guys in the rotation. Number 2, if Harden and Durant are on the court, nobody else touches the ball. So it's so hard for other guys to score fantasy points that if Durant and Harden, let's say Durant scores 60, Harden scores 50, Giannis scores 60, Middleton and Holiday each score, 40 to 45, there are no other fantasy points to go around. Those guys are going to have to be optimal. And that's a situation where we get, an Elijah Bryant, potentially 0 fantasy points in the optimal lineup.
Yeah, I think there is a pathway to it. It's not one that I would have the most confidence playing. If you're playing 1 or 2 lineups, I think try to play guys who are actually going to be getting minutes. And that to me means kind of capping it at the Pat Connaughton and Landry Shamet level. But I certainly get the idea here of trying to just get A, the ownership product down, B, to get some construction people won't have and get everybody in there. The one guy I really feel like I just wouldn't play at all is Bruce Brown because the price tag isn't down at all. And also it's hard to envision him getting minutes barring Harden getting hurt. I guess that's the one way here, but I'm not going to, for me, I wouldn't prepare for that kind of outcome. I know sometimes people do that for NFL and for I guess for NBA too, but are you getting any Bruce Brown at all? Because his price tag's ugly and he is a guy who could play, 7 minutes, I guess is the projection we have from, we have him actually 7.5 to give him full credit here for the Awesemo minutes projection.
Yeah, so the issue here with Bruce Brown is not only he might play 0 minutes tonight. That obviously is an issue in itself, but he's also 6,400. So I don't have Bruce Brown projected wildly different from Elijah Bryant. I think both of them are going to play potentially 0 minutes or at most, 4 or 5 minutes. Maybe Bruce Brown plays a little bit more, but relative to his price tag, he's actually probably the weakest play on the entire slate.
Yeah, I would agree. I think certainly his projection might be a little bit higher because he's getting some sort of minutes projection thrown his way, but he's the one guy I agree. I just don't know how you can get there on this slate at all, even honestly, even for one lineup, because you can get Jeff Green for cheaper. You can get the other actual value guys for cheaper. There's a lot of ways you can go that don't involve with Bruce Brown. So that's just one guy I guess you can hopefully rule out of the player pool, though. Now that we've said that out loud, I'm sure we've willed Bruce Brown back into the lineup. Let's do money time here because we're at about the halfway point of the show. If you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in either in the premium Slack or as a super chat. We got one super chat here that's very overbroad from Malcolm Revamp that we'll get after the break here, but I'll flip the hat And it is, in fact, money time here. And Tyler, but that's why Tyler is the producer of the year right there. Just always showing enthusiasm for money time, even when I may not have it myself. Let's do the ownership here. And of course, you can always get the ownership projections for showdowns and for the main slates that are out there for every sport. You go to awesemo.com/join, use that promo code NBA Live before lock for 25% off your first week. But the DraftKings top 5 projected own plays. And these are the ones, by the way, total ownership, not looking at captain or utility or anything like that. Giannis Antetokounmpo, 79% overall ownership, and he will be the highest owned captain, as I mentioned on the last show. Kevin Durant, number 2 at 62% overall ownership. James Harden projected for number 3 at 57%. Number 4, Pat Connaughton at 50%. And number 5, Jeff Green at 47%. Greg, when you hear those numbers for the top 5 on DraftKings, Giannis, Durant, Harden, Connaughton, Jeff Green, do any of them stand out to you as being a play that you're well under on? It's Harden, right? Or no, because you like Harden. So yeah.
No, it would be, well, also, I don't think that's what James Harden's ownership is actually going to be. So I would say, I don't think that's what the number is going to be, but Jeff Green, I think, is a little high, just given his price point at 5,200. Jeff Green was absolutely ridiculous 2 games ago. So also during the Durant game, Jeff Green went out and made what felt like 120% of his 3-point attempts. Everything he touched ended up going through the hoop. And then last game played 36 minutes, scored 19.5 fantasy points. If you look at his numbers for the year, he played 27 minutes per game, averaged 20 DraftKings points. He hasn't been an especially good fantasy producer. And then you also have to assume if Kevin Durant is going to play close to the entire game, there just aren't that many shots to go to Jeff Green. So he's not a bad player or anything like that. He's just, to me, going a little bit over-owned. And I would much rather just go really heavy stars and scrubs. So on the flip side of your question, you asked who was going over-owned. And I said I thought Jeff Green by a little bit under-owned. I think it's Giannis and Kevin Durant. I think both of them should be in nearly everybody's lineups.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And Giannis, I think I'm actually going to have a little bit less in the field of Giannis, and I don't love it, but that's more because I do like Middleton and Drew Holiday more. But I did think about just putting in a rule where Durant and Giannis have to be either captain or utility, and I wouldn't hate that move. It's not the way I'm doing it, because to me yesterday I had a mistake where I forced in Joel Embiid, and my lineups were telling me, hey, don't play Joel Embiid more than 20%. So I'm trying to go back to being a little more agnostic with my approach for today, and I'm sure it'll end very poorly as a result, but I will have less of the field of Giannis overall. The FanDuel top 5 owned plays, and again, these are overall ownership, not specific to any position. Giannis, number 1 at 80% overall ownership on FanDuel. Number 2, James Harden projected for 75%, though, as Greg and I have talked about, this could be a little bit lower and might be accounting more for normal James Harden than anything. Kevin Durant, number 3 at 61% overall ownership on FanDuel. Number 4, Drew Holiday at 47%. And number 5, Joe Harris at 42%. Greg, that top 5 on FanDuel, different than DraftKings because of the different formats, but Giannis, Harden, Durant, Drew Holiday, and Joe Harris. How does that top 5 sound to you? Does anybody stand out in a way that you're not finding the most appealing?
Not really. It's all, I mean, if James Harden's actually going to be nearly 80% on, that's much too high for him. But once again, we don't think that's going to be the case. So Joe Harris is going to stick out. He's somebody who also I don't think is a good play on DraftKings. FanDuel, totally different story where he's 8,500. Joe Harris is one of the best shooters in the NBA, has not been able to make shots this series at all. I think it was game 2 or game 3, he went 1 of 9 on uncontested jump shots, which is totally uncharacteristic for Joe Harris. Actually, it was game 3. But, you know, his price has been accounted for that now on FanDuel. It's really based on his recent results at 8,500. On DraftKings, it's not accounted for. DraftKings is just kind of priced as he normally is. So Joe Harris priced at 7,200. You know, that's a fair to maybe even slightly too high of a price for Joe Harris on DraftKings. Whereas his FanDuel price at 8,500, where the salary cap's different, like that's just way too cheap. So his fair price on both sites, he should be cheaper on DK, more expensive on FanDuel. So Joe Harris might be a name that stands out to people, but it's sensible.
So we got I'm going to say a crazy starting lineup from the Nets because they are now reverting back from where they've been the last game. Bruce Brown starting this one, not Jeff Green. Joe Harris will continue to start, but Bruce Brown back in the starting lineup after we just laid him to rest here at his price tag on DraftKings. And the thing, so there's a real risk here. It could be the exact same situation it was the last time Bruce Brown started, where he opened that game up, then they went to Jeff Green and then didn't really go back to him meaningfully. We could all see the spots where Bruce Brown gets yanked early, like there was early in the series, and then ended up being, viewed as a more necessary piece to get back in. But Bruce Brown, now a key hinge point on the slate, Greg, and one that I don't know how you handle this one. I don't think I'm going to change my lineups, and I think I'm just going to let it sit with no Bruce Brown because people will clamor to him. But based on the timing of the slate, based on the fact it's a Saturday night, it's 8 p.m. on the East Coast right now. If Bruce Brown is somehow good, people will not be on Bruce Brown enough, and they probably won't be on him as much as they should be for him as a starter.
All right, so Bruce Brown started a lot during the regular season, and he wasn't particularly great in those starts. And also keep in mind that a lot of those games, 2 of Durant, Harden, or Kyrie were out. So in the regular season, Bruce Brown started 41 games, only played 26 minutes per game as a starter, and averaged 23.5 DraftKings points. I don't think he's going to get to 26 minutes today. Even if he had his average fantasy performance, 23.5, that wouldn't be enough to be optimal on this particular slate. So to me, the real significance of Bruce Brown starting is I'm still not playing him, but even more so before when I said I thought Jeff Green was going over-owned on DraftKings, I think this really hurts Jeff Green.
I think it hurts Jeff Green, but I think it's going to drop his ownership enough. And I feel like he might be more productive coming off the bench and getting that, like he's not in with the starting mix. He's not sort of wearing himself down in that first grouping while Durant's still going to be putting up a lot of shots anyway. I'm not changing my exposures anyway. I wasn't crazy on Jeff Green, as I mentioned on the last show, though I am still above the field's 47% expected ownership on DraftKings. If I have the money to switch off Jeff Green in some lineups to Bruce Brown, I think I might do that in a few. I don't know if I'm going to have $1,200 laying around on DraftKings in some of them, but I think I don't want to say it's a fish play to go to Bruce Brown because he's not going to get the ownership he normally would have if we knew he's going to start, with 12 hours notice or something like that. But I do think there's a real pathway for Bruce Brown to start and then just quickly be off the floor and then they just go right to Jeff Green.
Yeah. So the other thing too is I'm going to push back on one thing a little bit where you said that maybe Jeff Green coming off the bench, there's more usage for him. I don't know if that's exactly what you said, but that's kind of what I pulled out of it. If Kevin Durant plays 48 minutes, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if Jeff Green is coming off the bench or starting. There is no added usage to be gained in the postseason. All that happens is I expect Jeff Green to play less minutes.
Yeah, I mean, so when he came in the first time that he was hurt and then played a bunch of minutes that I think was unexpected because he was on whatever minutes limit and then played still an ungodly amount of minutes. He came in for Brown at the 640 mark in the first quarter. And then he came in and got, I guess, Connaughton came in at the same time. I'm trying to see if there's any, what would be the logic in him being better than he was a starter? It might just be because it's Jeff Green and sometimes he's going to run hot. Sometimes he's going to run completely cold. I don't know. I'm going to keep my exposure where it is. And I think you probably should get some Bruce Brown at this point with me doing a show. I just don't have the wherewithal to change this all again. But I guess, Greg, if you were to give Bruce Brown a number now, knowing that he's starting, knowing that there is a pathway for him to play himself into usefulness or to play himself right back to the bench, what's an ownership number that to you feels about right for Bruce Brown?
Ownership that I want in my lineups or ownership that I think the field will get to him?
Give me both. All
right. I want him in none of my lineups. I'm not going to be playing him. The field, I think, is going to be, on FanDuel, still very low because he's 8,500. I'd rather just play Joe Harris at that price point, but maybe 10 to 15% the field will be on Bruce Brown on FanDuel. On DraftKings, it's 6,400. I'll say somewhere in the neighborhood of 12% or something like that.
All right. We also just got a projections update 3 minutes ago to reflect this. So let's see what moves around here. Now Bruce Brown being given 18 minutes by our Awesemo data team. And that didn't pull anything from Harden or from Durant, as you might expect. I don't think it pulled anything from Joe Harris either. So it seems like it's pulling directly from Jeff Green, though we still have Jeff Green in for 33 minutes. And to me at 5,200 on DK, I don't think that matters that much.
So I'm also so Jeff Green's minutes the last couple of games he came off the bench. So the first game, which you mentioned, he was supposed to be on minutes restriction. He ends up still playing 27 minutes, scores 15 fantasy points. He was also min priced that slate, so that made him a good play. So then the next game against Milwaukee, that was the game where he went nuts. This is one of the flukiest box scores of all time, though, because if you look at he did nothing other than shoot. He had 1 rebound and 3 assists that game. He scored 27 points, and he went 7 of 8 from 3. He did nothing other than make 3-pointers. And if he goes even 3 of 8 from 3 that game, still a pretty good 3-point shooting game, it's a bad fantasy night. And I think that's something we have to take into consideration if we look at the Jeff Green game the last time he came off the bench. If we're expecting something similar, I mean, obviously we're not going to expect the same high percentage of 3-point shooting, but he didn't do anything else. And he's not a guy who's really done a whole lot else over the course of the season. So for the year, Jeff Green played 27 minutes per game and averaged 3.8 rebounds and 1.6 assists per game. And I think that's somewhere around a reasonable expectations for him to play, high 20s, low 30s minutes. He's going to be very dependent on high percentage 3-point shooting to have a good game today. If he was going to be lower owned, then I'd say okay, that's fine. But he's still going to be one of the most popular plays on the slate.
All right, let's get to the super chat from Malcolm Revamp that we got distracted by that Bruce Brown news. That's a big one. And obviously, if you have your time out there, maybe worth running another crunch because there are some meaningful changes involved here. And it looks like Landry Shamet loses a few minutes because of the minutes being moved around from Bruce Brown. So there are some machinations and some trickle downs that might be important for everybody out there who's unlike me and wants to do their lineups one more time. But let's talk about this question for utility today on FanDuel, Greg. Who would you play at utility is the question. And I'll say that it looks like Joe Harris to me looks like the ideal FanDuel play and probably the most owned one, I guess, based on the ownership projections as well. But 8,500, I like him on DraftKings too, where he's more expensive, as I mentioned during the last show, where I think just people aren't going to be there at all. And I'm willing to be there in the hopes that he can do something. 25% ownership, Greg, on FanDuel at utility. Is Joe Harris the move?
It's Joe Harris and Blake Griffin. Those are the two best ones. Joe Harris being 8,500, Blake Griffin being 9,000. Somebody'd also added me in the YouTube chat and said, do we think we go stars and scrubs for FanDuel? The thing about going stars and scrubs on FanDuel is these scrubs on FanDuel relative to price are Joe Harris and Blake Griffin. So therefore it is the obvious roster move to make because the other guys like Jeff Green is 9,500 on FanDuel. That's too expensive for him. Then we have other guys, Pat Connaughton is 8,000. Chris, who was Mike James, 6,500. So you're not even paying that much more to get to guys like Joe Harrison, Blake Griffin. So by far, to me, the optimal strategy here is you go to Joe Harrison, Blake Griffin, and then just pay up for stars around them.
All right, we got a couple questions in the premium Slack. And if you have any more, drop them in. We'll take some more questions here before we talk through everything else that Greg finds important on the slate. If you're only doing a few lineups, is Joe Harris worth playing over Blake or Lopez? I mentioned it earlier. I am playing a good amount of Lopez in my lineups. I am playing, though, Joe Harris more than Blake Griffin. I think that Blake Griffin, to me, probably has a more obvious pathway to being useful than Joe Harris in some respects because Blake Griffin actually has had good games this series, but I'm just willing to trust the minutes more. Blake Griffin, as we talked about in the last show, Blake Griffin did lose some minutes down the stretch to Landry Shamet. That one, maybe he loses some minutes to Bruce Brown in some situations if Bruce Brown's running hot too. I just feel like there's more of a pathway for Blake to lose his minutes. So to me, I'd put Harris and Lopez above him. But Greg, are you with me that Blake would be the third out of that grouping, or do you like Blake more?
So the three are Joe Harris, Blake Griffin, and Brook Lopez. Yep. I prefer Blake Griffin to Joe Harris. Okay. Blake Griffin's just been a much better fantasy producer in the series. I understand Joe Harris has gotten the looks. He just hasn't made them. But also the salary that he is at on FanDuel, they're pretty close. I have Blake Griffin project for more fantasy points. And then on DraftKings, Blake Griffin at 7,800 and then Joe Harris at 7,200. I don't really think either of them are good plays at that price point, but I do prefer Griffin. DEK20 asking, general question, does late swaptimizer work for FanDuel single games? If so, what's the magic trick? I don't understand this question, Greg. I think you could just remake your lineups, I guess. He says he's looking to combine the handmade lineups with his Fantasy Cruncher lineups to see them all in Fantasy Cruncher and the combined player usage for both handmade and Fantasy Cruncher. I guess there's a logic to it. I don't think there's an obvious answer here, though. So, I mean, first of all, if you're actually late swapping your lineups for single game slate, know that, I mean, I wish that's something we could do. That'd be pretty sweet. Just at halftime, be like, hey, I'm taking out all the guys that roster that suck and put in the guys who are doing well so far. But so I think, I mean, I've never done this before. So I've never had a need for this, but maybe if you download the lineups that you already have from the CSV and FanDuel and then upload them into Fantasy Cruncher, then maybe that would work. Although that would create two different, it would create two different crunches.
Yeah, I don't think that works because I'm doing that. Well, this isn't the real one. Hold on, let me see. Yeah, because it's a different format for the way that late swaptimizer takes in ones with entries that have already started, isn't it?
Yeah, there wouldn't be a way to do it where they're in the same crunch.
Let me see. I'm trying to late swaptimize. All right, so I'm trying it with DK, so it's gonna be obviously a little different, but it should be the same premise. Yeah, you can't even upload the DK entries like CSV to late swap optimize. Like it won't do anything right now.
Yeah. Well, also, I've never tried to late swap optimize for a single game slate because
you can't normally.
You can't. So
yeah.
I don't think I'm just going to say that there's no magic trick.
Yeah, you might want to try to learn Excel a little better if that's something you're trying to do, where like that's what I would do for myself. Like I could theoretically hand build lineups by just typing names in, and then it'll assign player IDs and all of that. Like it's not something I actually do, but that's the way that you could do it. But yeah, for something like that, that's a little more custom. You can't like swap optimizer's meant to be for like mostly the larger slates and the ones where you can actually swap optimize a game that's about to happen with things that have already happened. It's not meant for that kind of usage. So creative approach, if nothing else. Who are the guys that we haven't talked about that are most important to you? Because I've extolled my love for Chris Middleton enough on the earlier show. I think he's a very strong play that people have slept on really throughout the series and in general, though there have been some down parts for him in the playoffs. And he and Drew Holiday, to me, still functionally the same plays, though I would like more Middleton than Holiday. But is there anybody for you here that you really want to start making a case for before the final 15 minutes here that we have before lock?
It's hard because I kind of feel like we've talked about almost everybody at this point. PJ Tucker, just because he's on the cheaper end, and he's also a Draftkings specific play, not as strong on Fanduel because relative to the other guys, we have PJ Tucker 7,500 on Fanduel. I'd rather get to Joe Harris at 8,500. But on Draftkings, he's kind of in a price point by himself. 4,400. The next closest guy who's more expensive is Jeff Green at 5,200. And now we don't like Jeff Green as much. And then if you're going cheaper, the guy who's closest to him, it's Nick Claxton at 2,800. So with that in mind, PJ Tucker just being in a price point by himself and somebody who I think is going to play over 30 minutes tonight, as long as he avoids foul trouble. I think the Bucks like that matchup, PJ Tucker trying to guard Kevin Durant. So I think that Tucker is going to play as many minutes as he could handle today. And with that in mind and where his price point is, I think that he's somebody who's worth being overweight to the field on.
Yeah, I'm with you on PJ Tucker. I think that he's always been a fine play in this series, just relative to what PJ Tucker play is, which at this point, I would hope that we can all sort of recognize him for the guy that he is. He's somebody who's going to play a lot of minutes because Kevin Durant's out there. He's somebody who can knock down a few corner threes and boost the day and also fall into a few rebounds as well as blocks and steals. But a guy who's still not going to be the most productive, as I mentioned on the last show with Steve Buzzard, like he's a 0.48 fantasy point per minute guy on the year. I'm at 0.49 today, and that's obviously not going to be setting the world on fire either way, but it doesn't matter. It's just the salary and just him playing minutes and him having potential to be useful enough is why you're playing PJ Tucker today. And certainly makes a lot more sense for a showdown slate like this one than it would on your average any day regular season main slate. So let's see. I'm trying to think who else, if we have any questions to hit on. Pat Connaughton, I guess, is the one play that we haven't talked about much. That I talked about more with Steve Buzzard, and we both viewed him as a value play that you want to get to. And I'm actually, just for everybody who's following along here, I'm actually going to resort my lineups, but not recrunch them. So that's just the one thing I'm going to do based on the projections. But Pat Connaughton, I think, will be a guy who's going to pop up a little more for me because of Landry Shamet coming down. And I think, to me, he's the most alive as a real value play who's actually going to get some degree of minutes and can earn a few more if they go small like they did last game with Brook Lopez not playing in the fourth. How are you handling Pat Connaughton today with a lot of the field expects to be on him as a value play of the day?
He's necessary evil. I know people, I already see people in the chat, at least one guy go, Pat Connaughton's going to sink me again. Yeah, potentially. He played 22 minutes last game, scored 2.5 fantasy points, but he's going to be in the rotation and he's so cheap that he's unavoidable to me. I'm overweight to the field on him. He's somebody who, also if you look at his numbers for the year, and if we expect those same 22 minutes for the season, he played 22 minutes per game, average 16.5 fantasy points. If he scores his average game in the regular season at this price point, he's fairly likely to be in the optimal lineup.
I would agree. And as I mentioned, I'm playing him a little bit at captain too. That's not a play that I expect to have the highest upside, but I think there is a pathway if all the guys go off that they're, that he can get there. That said, a play like that one, as we saw yesterday with the Clippers slate, if you played that showdown at all, Terrence Mann was not the optimal showdown captain because Donovan Mitchell just went nuts enough that it didn't even matter that Terrence Mann scored 50 points. That's certainly another outcome that can happen very easily in this game. So you kind of have to keep that in mind. But to me, I think that Pat Connaughton viable anywhere you want to play him. Though to me, only viable on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he's the kind of guy I feel like you probably wouldn't play at all. Yeah, no need to play him on FanDuel. And once again, it's just because of those really cheap price points on guys like Blake Griffin and Joe Harris. Because on FanDuel, Pat Connaughton is priced at $8,000. You get Joe Harris for $500 more. Okay, I'm getting a lot of Pat Connaughton now with this. Oh man, this is worrisome. All right. Well. It's like I said, I think he's a necessary evil. He's going to be chalky. Listen, there's going to be ties tonight, unless there's a blowout.
or there's something, crazy happens, somebody gets in foul trouble, there's an injury, there's going to be a bunch of ties for first place. I'm pretty confident in that.
Yeah, it was something that we talked about in the last show. And I guess it's a question for you too, Greg, where how crappy of a lineup are you willing to play tonight? Because to me, I normally don't play ones that are under that 15 fantasy point projection, 50 point difference rather from what the optimal or the top projected lineup is. But today I'm doing that more just because there isn't much more. I think for me, I have there being about 80 lineups that are actually going to be within that projected range and everything else drops off. Are you willing to take more chops today? Is there anything you're doing different than you normally would? Because for a game 7 and also one where the studs are so clearly pronounced, it just seems to me like you really either have to be willing to play a very highly duplicated lineup or play a mix of duplicated lineups that are also going to be less projected lineups as well in the mix.
I mean, I'm playing Elijah Bryant tonight. I have a couple lineups with Bobby Portis. So yeah, I'm playing some bad lineups. I think it's a situation where, like I said before, at the top of the show, for people who weren't watching from the start, we have seen players play 0 minutes and end up in the optimal lineup in this slate. And in theory, this should be more likely to be that scenario than any other one, because it is not out of the realm of possibility that Kevin Durant plays 48 minutes tonight. Giannis could play 45 minutes. Chris Middleton, Jrue Holiday, James Harden, these guys could all play 45 to 48 minutes. And then that's going to make all of their fantasy totals so high for those guys. And then it also means there's no production for anybody else. There's a pretty good chance that somebody who's min price or really cheap salary ends up scoring 0 or 2 or 3 fantasy points and ends up in the optimal lineup in that situation.
Also, somebody had asked if Jeff Green comes down as a captain option because of him not starting. He actually did come down a lot for me as a captain. So that's the one thing. Again, I didn't recrunch things. I just shifted around the same 1,000 lineup crunch I had based upon the projections that I'm reflecting now. And I'm still getting Jeff Green in 45% of my lineups overall, but I'm only getting him a captain at 3%. And before, I think I was going to be double the field's 8% expected captain ownership. So I think Jeff Green, just based on what he's going to be carrying for captain before, as well as the fact he's going to get a few less minutes, potentially, maybe a few more than we're anticipating cut off his normal ledger. I think that Jeff Green at captain just might be a bad move, but one that I'm still going to get 2 lineups with.
Yeah, I don't like Jeff Green on the slate. To me, I think he's one of the most overowned plays. He's still pretty popular, even though he's moving to the bench. We currently have him projected for 40% ownership overall, 6% ownership in the captain spot. That is on Draftkings. On Fanduel, we have Jeff Green projected for 23% ownership overall. To me, with Jeff Green moving to the bench role, I think he's overpriced.
Eric Johnson asking, would you play Bryant in the captain spot to stack up on studs? I think that's not a move you should still do anyway.
That is, I'll be honest, I did think about doing that in the single entry lineup earlier, but I am not. That is, that's a little far for me.
Yeah, I feel like play Connaughton at captain, and even that's I'd play Connaughton at captain in cash maybe, so you can sort of you're probably going to see some minutes for him, and even that's really risky. Elijah Bryant, he might get a 0, so 1.5 times 0 is still 0, and a captain that's a kiss of death. So that's probably a very bad move, barring something real weird happening here. Let's see, Gregory trying to get Harden, KD, and Giannis in the same lineup. TTID forever is asking in the YouTube chat.
Yeah, so for me, the way that I currently have my ownership as far as the studs go, I'm overweight to Giannis, Harden, and Giannis, and then I'm underweight to Middleton and Jrue. So to me, yes, I do want to load up on those 3 guys. I think that Harden's going to look much better today, and then just total stars and scrubs and punt away beyond them.
And I, with the adjusted rates that I'm giving Harden, and after that second sort that I gave just now, am down to a stone cold 0 James Harden lineups, which, for the risk averse, probably not the move, but for me, that's what it's going to be on the day. And I will have a lot more Chris Middleton, a lot more Jrue Holiday, and the pièce de resistance is going to be a little more Pat Connaughton. I will have 2x the field of Pat Connaughton.
Hey, listen, which, by the way, isn't Pat Connaughton over 50% owned?
Well, I guess not quite 2x then, Greg. You caught me. It's actually 85% is what I'll have of Pat Connaughton.
Yeah, I was gonna say it sounds like I would listen if I could. I would get double the field on Pat Connaughton and get to 110% or whatever.
It's honestly I don't think it's a bad play, but it's definitely a play that there's a lot of variability to it. And as we talked about earlier, Brook Lopez closing that fourth quarter, you would see less Connaughton minutes, and there's certainly some risk. Eric, I'm saying Eric McPherson, EMAC, as you may know him. I call him Eric McPherson, getting a little gust from the gods tonight for doing double duty. Thank you, EMAC. I appreciate it very much. And I like that EMAC's now paying for an Awesemo membership. It's fine. Finally, EMAC is paying back to the company after stealing money from us from so long.
You know what's funny about that is there was a guy who used to tag me with just random conspiracy theories, and he was like, "EMAC's stealing my personal information." I was like, "Okay." He's like, "You're working with a criminal. EMAC steals my personal information." Like, for what gain? Who are you? You've 12 followers on Twitter.
Yeah, that's the people you really got to target for conspiracies. That way nobody will ever know. That's the main thing. We got a super chat from Darren Unger. FanDuel, Harden, Middleton, and Harris, or Durant, Pat Connaughton, and Holiday. Pat Connaughton on FanDuel seems like a non-starter. That's the one spot I think I'd go Harden, Middleton, and Harris. Yeah, Harden, Middleton, and Harris for me. Probably much chalkier too, at least based on the ownership projections we have. So keep that in mind. Hopefully you have something in there that'll be a little bit different. Anything in the premium side? If you got any questions, drop them in right now, whether it be super chat, regular question. I'm checking for everything because we got 5 minutes left to lock. And Lord knows, I think I have said everything possible we can do here. 2 hours of a single game slate. That is Iron Man status. But here, I'm going to assume this is a question that you've not talked about today. Who is the player who you currently project to play 0 minutes do you think has the most upside? So 0 minutes might be a tough question because I'm using the Awesemo projection or for minutes as always. And those even today have like Jeff Teague for 0.7 minutes because they're trying to cover the chance that Jeff Teague could somehow see whatever opportunity. The guy I'm playing the most of though, and actually got more of with that resort is Nick Claxton, who I'm getting 12% of. And I don't feel good about that. He's already burned me once. I think that same day I had Bobby Portis when he didn't play a bunch. I also had Nick Claxton a bunch, and that was terrible. But like he plays minutes, like he gets a shot each time. And if Blake Griffin's like terrible, I feel like maybe he can get to 10 somehow. But that to me is the one. Who is it for you? It is Bobby Portis, just because he's been in the rotation for basically the entire year. He's a good points per minute fantasy producer, and if Bobby Portis enters the rotation, I wouldn't be shocked if, maybe Brook Lopez gets in foul trouble. Maybe Brook Lopez doesn't play. Like Brook Lopez didn't play in the fourth quarter at all last game and struggled at times when he was on the court. Definitely against small ball lineups of the Nets. Brook Lopez just doesn't really have a place on the court defensively. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Bobby Portis ends up sneaking to the rotation, playing 8 to 10 minutes. And that would make him somebody who I think has a chance to end up in the optimal lineup, even though I right now have a project for 0 minutes. Yeah, I get it. Bobby Portis certainly has tricked me enough times. I actually got some of them last time out too. Not quite as much as the game before, but I was like, yeah, maybe this is the time he plays. So I've been burned twice by it now. I'm not going back there. So of course today will be the day. He's the guy who surprises me the most though, that he's been completely like taken out of the rotation. I know he's not a good defender, but like he's still got a 111 defensive efficiency rating on the year. Like, that's a team rating still, but that's court time he's out there. I don't know. I feel like he could give you like 5 good minutes of trying to guard Durant and like harassing him and hitting him with body blows and then scoring a little. I can't believe he's been taken out entirely out of the rotation, but that's the way it is. Yeah. You know what? I'm about to up my, we got 3 minutes until lock. I'm going to try to really quickly up my exposure to Bobby Portis. Talk yourself. He really is a guy that it feels like he should have been a part of the series and in the mix and like at least getting like Bryn Forbes minutes or some share of Connaughton minutes. But yeah, he's a non-factor so far. And if Greg gets him right and he hits today after I'm playing none of him and he's gobbled me up the last couple times, I'll be a sad boy, but I'm proud of you. Big Money NJ, $25 super chat saying nothing, though he did say that he wants my money hat. You can get it for yourself on Amazon. I won't give you all, won't do all the work for you, but it's actually very affordable. In fact, might be cheaper than that super chat. So go check it out. But shout out Big Money NJ. Greg, that might be you under a pseudonym. You are the Big Money NJ I know. Yeah, well, listen, that is if he just wants the hat, I think that you have yourself quite a business if you're reselling those hats for $25. That's honestly might be a good idea. That's one thing we had talked to the Awesemo merch department about trying to make that happen, and they couldn't find the quality pleather to make it actually sing the way that we would like to. But maybe someday there'll be some money hats out there for sale that I can finally profit off of. Let's see, Brown or Pat C or Tucker is the question from Brian Cuevas. So I guess he's got a lot of money to go around, or that's a FanDuel question. What would that be for you, Greg? No site given here on YouTube, so I'm just answering out of the good nature of my heart. All right, so Brown, Pat C. So Bruce Brown, it still wouldn't make sense if it's FanDuel because the salaries are still off. But listen, I mean, we talked about before, we don't really like Bruce Brown all that much, but relative to those other options,
one of the reasons we don't like Bruce Brown is because of the price point. So if you have the extra money to get to Bruce Brown from those guys, like I certainly expect him to score more fantasy points than Pat Connaughton.
Yeah, I would agree. I think for me, based on the updated minutes here, Bruce Brown being in for 18 would give me a little bit more for Bruce Brown. I have Bruce Brown at 15.3, Connaughton at 12.8. And then who is this third one on there? Was
PJ
Tucker. And then Tucker actually have the highest at 17.8, but these are DK points. So keep that in mind for your site. But yeah, I guess I would have Tucker as the best option out of that group. Also, guys, hit that like button if you can. I have not been pandering enough for likes throughout the show. And it's not one of those Josh situations where you go like, oh, like Lofty didn't get enough likes. It's been just me here asking for likes the whole time. So please hit that like button before you go today. Help us get to a respectable number because I have been too swamped with actually trying to keep the shows moving here. But shout out to the chat. Greg, any final thoughts here? We're about 1 minute left to lock, and it'll probably be locked by the time people hear this. So anything you just want to say here, take the pulpit.
Hey, listen, first, shout out to Spags, double duty shows and having to do it on the fly. Figure out who's going to do that. So props to you. And then also, congratulations to Eytan. I don't know if this is his first kid or if he already has multiple kids. Maybe it's his 8th kid. But whatever it is, exciting that a kid's being born. And listen, Spags, you're part of the process now. You took over. You stole his job from him. And now the kid can't eat in the future. But either way, congrats to Eytan. And then also, guys, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Do it for Spags.
Yes, please. And also go play on Prize Picks for me too and get $100 for yourself with the promo code Awesemo on there. If you are tired of worrying about ownership and all the other things that go on the big sites, play on Prize Picks, pick some players for yourself and go get yourself a $100 deposit match with that promo code Awesemo. Make sure to follow at Ehrenberg DFS, follow at Chris Spags, and go send some love to at Shander Show on Twitter too for his big moment, a special moment in any fella's life that we can all say. But we appreciate you guys for being here and wish you guys the best luck. Go enjoy Game 7. Bye, guys.